Our protagonist found himself transported into the body of the Demon King within the world of a game in which he had reached a level no one else had ever achieved. He was on the verge of being dragged into a war over food, a war in which he was destined to be defeated by the main character. So, instead of engaging in that battle, he ordered the army leaders to halt all preparations and chose to secure food through farming and land reclamation. Will our Demon King succeed by relying on his knowledge of the game and his past life experience in agriculture? Will he be able to convince the demons of his plan? That's what we'll find out in today's story. Our story begins with Kim Jang-chul, an ordinary graduate student in Korea, or at least, he used to be, until he suddenly awoke to find himself in the body of his favorite game's supreme overlord, the Demon King, Kratos. The game, titled Blood Vetras, revolves around the return of an ancient hero from slumber to stand against the world's evils. Chul's thoughts are interrupted by the entrance of a servant calling out to him, revealing himself to be Zephyros, a level 15 commander, who informs Chul, now Kratos, that preparations for the invasion are finally complete. At that, Asurath, the bloodthirsty prince at level 534, remarks that their hunger will soon be sated. The Ice Queen Circe, level 531, adds that their land has turned barren due to tragedy, forcing them to devour their own kind. Then Hartok, the Duke of Mist at level 555, declares that their enemies will be reduced to mere footnotes in history. Baal, Tyrant of the Blackstone and level 539, follows, saying their foes will become nothing more than meals. But Kratos' booming voice cuts through the conversation, demanding that the Demon King's armies listen. He declares that this war must come to an end, by his command, as the Demon King. He orders them to abandon all thoughts of invasion and to take up farming instead of fighting. The army commanders are stunned, enraged, branding him insane and irrational. Yet Kratos raises his voice even further, growing so intense that silence falls upon them. He wasn't doing this out of goodwill, but out of fear of Mukonji, level 9999, who might hunt him down and kill him. Chul recalls his past, when he entered the College of Agriculture, his true dream and ambition. Thanks to his brilliant mind, he quickly became a star in graduate school. But as his popularity rose, others began assigning him their work, from writing research papers to managing their private projects, and some even went as far as having him plow the fields himself. His life shifted from rising academic star to a top-tier servant. He found himself trapped in a loop of questions. Why was he doing all this while professors reaped the credit? Eventually, he snapped, desperate for revenge, but his dopamine reserves began to run dry, pushing him toward the edge of sanity. Only one thing still gave him joy: games. Given how difficult the game was, progression felt nearly impossible, and no one had ever made it past level 19. Still chasing that feeling of accomplishment, he played round after round, without rest or boredom, until he became the first person on Earth to finish level 19 in Blood War. The moment he pressed start level 20, a blinding light exploded before him, and panic overtook him, as if his consciousness was being ripped from his body. Terrified and confused, he struggled to calm himself, trying to grasp the situation, only to find that his body had turned blue. He had become a spirit, or pure consciousness, which meant he wouldn't die even if he fell from that height. In the distant landscape stood the Tower of Life, a sign that he had entered the spirit realm inside Blood Vetras. He was then rapidly drawn toward the tomb of the Sacred Knight. Chul is overwhelmed with joy when he realizes that the character he's taken over is none other than Mukonji, the most powerful figure in the entire game, and now he can live as an invincible king. But as he reflects on it, the thrill fades, and he sees it for what it truly is: a nightmare. Suddenly, his direction shifts violently, pulling him away from Mukonji's grave and toward a completely different destination. The moment he sees where he's headed and who he's about to become, discomfort washes over him. He's completely unwilling to accept it, yet there it was, the character he would embody, Kratos, the Demon King. Commander Zephyros overhears the other leaders discussing Kratos and how they now see him as weak and cowardly, especially after he canceled the long-awaited invasion, out of nothing but fear. The bloodthirsty Prince Asurath suggests they band together, behead him, and divide the throne. After all, Kratos himself became Demon King by killing the previous ruler. Hartok, the Duke of Mist, replies that perhaps Kratos isn't truly weakened, and if they attack, two of them might die or end up gravely injured. The Ice Queen Circe adds, turning to Asurath, that if he wants to be used as a meat shield, that's his own choice. Asurath lashes out, asking her if she wants to be the first to die by his hand, while Baal, Tyrant of the Blackstone, lost in his own world, mutters that he just wants something to eat. Ignoring Baal, Asurath addresses the rest of the leaders. What if we find proof that the Demon King is truly weak? What should we do then? All the commanders respond with demonic laughter, making it clear they wouldn't hesitate to kill him the moment they sense any weakness. Zephyros hears everything but chooses not to intervene in their council. Instead, he rushes to Kratos, the Demon King, to deliver an urgent report. He explains that the army's morale has collapsed completely, that internal attacks and acts of cannibalism among the races have surged, and some soldiers have already begun deserting the demon lands. He adds that the four great rulers are furious, and now firmly believe their king is weak, and they're plotting to kill him. Kratos is deeply shaken. If the four commanders unite against him, he'll be crushed instantly. Showing any weakness now would mean certain death. Thoughts of Mukonji resurface. No one has taken over that character yet, meaning it's still just a corpse. If they invade the human world, there'll be no one to stop them. But Zephyros interrupts again, informing him that General Uga, who was monitoring the Sacred Guardian's tomb, has sent an urgent transmission. In the footage, Mukonji is shown awake, and already attacking the demons with unrestrained fury. Kratos grows even more anxious. Someone clearly deranged has taken control of Mukonji, and Kratos has no desire to confront them. Perhaps the best option now is to hide and stay out of sight. But then again, even a hint of fear would spell his death at the hands of the four kings. On the other hand, if he decides to go through with invading the human world, Mukonji will annihilate him, possibly even gouge his eyes out, like he often did in the game. Kratos feels cursed, even though he's inside the world he used to love. But he regains his composure and realizes the first step must be solving the food crisis. Only then can he pacify the demons and make them more obedient. Zephyros asks him where he plans to go next, and Kratos responds that he's heading out in search of fertile land for farming. Zephyros looks at him in disgust, confused by the Demon King's tone. Kratos, puzzled by his expression, asks what's wrong, and Zephyros replies, "The arrogant, narcissistic Kratos, the one who never showed a shred of respect, couldn't possibly be speaking this way." He urges him to stop, claiming it's revolting and makes him sick. Kratos is stunned by the response, especially since this is exactly how he always acted while playing. Zephyros had only appeared once before the player's final battle against the Demon King, and without any explanation. That brief appearance made him immensely popular, as he died trying to block the player's path to the Demon King. This led many to believe he had always been fiercely loyal to Kratos, or perhaps had dreamed of serving him since ancient times, which is why his current scolding came as a complete shock. Zephyros continues his reprimand, calling this a rare and baffling failure. Never before had the Demon King lost his aura in such a way, and on top of that, his memory now seemed to rival that of a goldfish, especially after considering farming demon lands. Kratos shouts back, declaring that he is the king, and Zephyros must stop addressing him like this. But Zephyros calmly replies that he will continue to do so. He then adds that both the previous king, and Kratos himself, had once tried to cultivate this land, but the terrain is barren, the climate brutal, and nothing can grow here. Kratos responds that he knows this place is called the Land of Death, but adds with confidence that the only one who can bring it back to life is him. Deep down though, he truly hated working in agriculture, but if that was his only chance at staying alive, he'd gladly do it. He scoops up a handful of soil and places it in his mouth, tasting it to check if it's even remotely viable. Zephyros is baffled by the act and begins jotting down notes, remarking that the king has lately been behaving like a destitute man. Kratos orders him to stop writing, but Zephyros explains that this is his duty, to record the history of the Demon Kings, an act of great significance among demons. Though it seems his memory is deteriorating fast, Kratos lets him do as he pleases and doesn't argue further, spitting the soil out of his mouth. As expected, he finds the soil completely dead, devoid of nutrients, especially nitrogen, the most essential element for plant growth. And while nitrogen makes up 78% of the atmosphere, plants cannot absorb it directly. This is due to nitrogen's strong triple bond, which prevents it from reacting easily, hence why humans developed nitrogen fixation, which revolutionized agriculture. But here, that seems nearly impossible, especially since there's no infrastructure in place for farming. His only option is to rely on the natural method of nitrogen fixation, lightning. The immense voltage from lightning produces powerful electric currents, oxidizing nitrogen into nitrates. These nitrates then dissolve into rainwater, allowing the soil to absorb them, which plants can then utilize. Kratos, the Demon King, was known for only one primary skill, Blood Strike, a skill that unleashes a massive wave of deadly lightning. Thus, the lightning he can generate, combined with rainfall, forms the perfect method to create fertile, plant-friendly soil. With that, Kratos orders Zephyros to step back. He's about to execute his plan, but as soon as he scratches his hand to draw blood and activate the skill, he's struck by a searing pain, wondering how this king ever endured such agony each time. Suddenly, Kratos turns around after hearing faint whispers. Behind a tree, he sees the four commanders eavesdropping, whispering among themselves that Kratos has grown weak. Even Zephyros tells him that his current appearance makes it clear he's no longer the powerful figure he once was. Kratos suspects Zephyros might be a professional assassin, trying to bait him into letting his guard down so he can finish him off, but dying now isn't an option. Kratos flares up and resolves to activate his skill. He manages to draw enough blood from his hand to trigger the technique, yet the pain in his palms is unbearable, and he struggles to hold himself together, determined not to show any weakness in front of the demons. At that moment, the 4 commanders step out from behind him, asking if he's feeling uncomfortable. Elsewhere, Mukonji stands at the edge of a towering cliff, his mind clouded and fragmented. Though his memories are slowly beginning to resurface, he feels as though he's always been in this place, as if he's lived through more than one lifetime. He had always followed the hand of fate that guided him, but this time, it's vanished. There's no signal, no direction, and he wonders what purpose still keeps him alive. Back with Krytos, Aseroth grins maliciously and reminds him of the Demon King's law, the strongest shall rule. Krytos panics at the words, realizing these commanders possess terrifying power, while he currently can't access any of his skills. One wrong move, and he might be killed. Aseroth notices the powerful aura surging from Krytos' body and comments that the fight hasn't even started, yet Krytos is charging his energy so intensely that his body trembles. Then, with a confident smile, he asks if Krytos really believes he can defeat all 4 of them in his current state. But as he glances back, he notices the other commanders still hiding behind a tree. Shocked, he asks, "What kind of nonsense are you all pulling now?" They reply that they'll observe the battle first, and then decide whether or not to join in. Aseroth breaks into a heavy sweat, calling them backstabbing villains. But they simply answer, "We're demons. Of course we're evil." Zephyros steps in, stating that according to ancient demon tradition, any battle over the throne must be to the death. No surrender is allowed. Krytos and Aseroth both object. Still, Aseroth tries to steady himself, convincing his mind that he can win, especially now that Krytos is far weaker than he once was. Meanwhile, Krytos is paralyzed with anxiety and fear, uncertain of what to do next. He tells himself that everything up to now was just a test, to measure the power of the Demon King. He had assumed the Demon King must be strong, but clearly, he's not, at least not in the way Krytos imagined. Aseroth launches a sudden attack, and Krytos instinctively recognizes the move from the game. It's either a thrust or a slash, and there's no way he could dodge it, or so he thought. Yet somehow, his body moves on its own and avoids the strike, without him understanding how. He then notices Aseroth's foot shifting outward, and deduces the next move will be a wide slash. That exact step was something he'd seen countless times while playing. Hartok turns to Serki in astonishment, saying Krytos dodged Aseroth's attack with incredible precision, and could have easily countered by severing Aseroth's arm. Serki replies that she doesn't understand why he didn't do it either, but for now, all they can do is watch. Back to Krytos, who continues to evade Aseroth's strikes flawlessly. He mutters in disbelief that he has no idea what's going on. Every one of Aseroth's attacks is exactly like they were in the game. He remembers that the first time he faced him in-game, he always lost. He never knew how to beat him. Aseroth was too fast, with a huge attack range, making the fight brutally difficult. But after being killed by him dozens of times, he finally defeated him, for the first time, on attempt number 128. And after that, across 19 full replays of the game, he defeated him easily, without taking a single hit. Krytos lets out a wicked laugh and calmly declares he'll win this fight, because Aseroth simply won't be able to land a single blow. Terror spreads across the faces of the other commanders as they watch the battle unfold. Krytos is effortlessly dodging Aseroth's attacks, and even mocking him while doing so. None of them can believe their eyes. Krytos is toying with Aseroth like he's too weak to even be considered a proper opponent. Furious at being mocked, Aseroth begins hurling insults non-stop. Krytos laughs mockingly as he sidesteps another strike, admitting he feels surprisingly at ease. And while that doesn't necessarily mean he can win, he realizes something crucial. This world operates under the same rules as the game. Suddenly, a message appears before him, much like those found in classic narratives, telling him he has finally grasped the world's fundamental mechanics. Because of his precise and focused dodging of Aseroth's attacks, a portion of his character's skills has been unlocked as a reward. The enemy targeting feature becomes available, and Krytos comments that it's typically used to execute a special move. He selects Aseroth as his target and activates the Bloodstrike skill. Massive tongues of flame erupt and engulf Aseroth, burning him violently. The remaining commanders are horrified by the sheer power of the attack. Krytos claims victory, cheered on by the crowds of demons who witnessed the battle. He then approaches Aseroth, now completely immobilized. Annoyed, he mutters that Aseroth should have died from Bloodstrike, a move that caused instant death in the game, but attributes his survival to his high regeneration rate, which drastically reduced the damage. Krytos unleashes the skill once more to ensure Aseroth is truly finished. Cut to the other commanders, still shaken, whispering among themselves that Krytos is attacking Aseroth with full force, to kill him painlessly. Back to Krytos, who notices Aseroth still isn't dead, unsure what to do next. Just then, a new notification appears, stating that Aseroth's clothing has been completely destroyed, triggering a new feature, Armor Inventory Inspection. When Krytos opens the inventory, he finds it contains only clothes. nothing else usable. He closes it and mutters that he must find a way to finish Azarath off quickly. His regeneration is too high, and he could rejoin the fight any moment. A sudden idea strikes him. As long as Azarath is still alive, he can be targeted again, meaning Bloodstrike can be used once more. With a wicked grin, Krytos laughs. "I'm a genius. Now I can fill the earth with nitrogen." And he can tell that the rest of them are terrified now. And he decides to go ahead and test it out. He calls up to Sergai and she asks what he wants. He tells her to tie up a Surat tightly. She blushes, saying that if he wants her to tie up a pretty much naked dude, and she mistakes it as him wanting to humiliate the both of them. But of course, it's a multi-step plan. The first step is to prepare the lightning rod, which is a Surat. R.I.P., bro. As the colors start to return back to his face, he yells, saying that he has completely recovered and that he's indeed gotten weaker, since he can't kill him with Bloody Strike. So he'll definitely get out of this and cut his head off. And this is where step 2 comes in, which is just Bloody Strike over and over and over. With this, he can oxidize the nitrogen in the air into nitrate, and he tells Hardock that he wants him to cover this whole area with fog, and it has to be so thick that water will be flowing. Hardock starts to mistake it, asking if he intends to make this whole place wet so he can make the lightning more painful, and that this sure is a creative way of torture. And he's learned something new today. As he puts his arms to his shoulders to prepare casting his spell, he does exactly that. As the fog begins to envelop the area, so does the rain it forms. And then step 4 is a strike and repeat over and over. As Krytos is zapping him, he says, "This hurts." But Zephys just watches completely straight-faced. The rest, though, look on in horror at the sight of this madman. And even Acer looks horrified because Bro is making an evil ass face, saying with this he can make the land here perfect for farming and he can get some bountiful harvest, and that he's getting excited. So he continues zapping away at Asherid over and over and over until he felt satisfied enough with the land. As he picks up some of the dirt, he says this is good. He just needs to keep infusing nitrogen using this method, and next he'll be improving the soil. Here's another chemistry lesson. He explains that this loose monovalent structured soil neither allows oxygen to enter nor drains water well. And for farming, crumbly granular structured soil is ideal, which is why the thing he has to create now is none other than menorah. And he tells them all to get him some, and he means that literally. They all sit there confused about the situation, soaked in blood and rain, saying that there's no way after making an example out of a sewer and grilling him, he wants to smear him with, "That's just unbelievably cruel." Back to the other side of the world, Kimchi is walking through a forest as somebody begs for help. He peeks over a bush, seeing a couple people. He wonders what he's looking at. But to the rest of us educated folks, we see it's none other than the Tamu version of Lloyd Faw and Javier, because this is made by the same guy, if you didn't know. As they beg him for help, they look up at his outfit. As he stares at them, they start making horrified faces, and he tells them not to worry, as he's not suspicious. But they say they can't believe that because he looks horrifying. Kimchi asks them if they hurt their leg and then picks up the Tamu version of Javier as he starts screaming, and he tells the Tamu Lloyd to lead the way. They then start introducing themselves, and it's literally just Javier and Lloyd spelled backwards. Javier asks Kimchi if he may know who he is, and Kimchi says, starting from now on, that's what he needs to find out. The scene shifts to the remaining 3 commanders, gathered together in visible discomfort. Hartok asks, how are we supposed to hand over our bathroom to him? Serki, tense, replies that whatever Krytos is requesting from them is absolutely revolting. Bal adds that he hasn't eaten in a long time, which is why he can't use the bathroom, and that even Serki doesn't use it either. Serki snaps at him, embarrassed, shouting that it's none of his business. Hartok insists he won't give up his bathroom to Krytos, no matter what, and suggests they force some low-level demons to use it instead. We cut to 2 guards standing watch over a low-ranking demon, who's pleading to be let out because he can't relieve himself while being stared at, saying their presence is stressing him out. One of the guards responds that every demon says the same thing, yet none have actually produced any waste. At that moment, Hartok enters and asks what's causing the delay. Hartok approaches the demon, who trembles in fear as he explains that he hasn't eaten anything, so he simply can't use the bathroom. The only way would be if they forced it out of him. Hartok grabs him by the neck and tells him that his idea is absolutely brilliant. He then prepares to strike, intending to kill him. But Bal intervenes just in time, grabbing his arm before the blow lands. Hartok turns to him, demanding to know the meaning of this interference. Bal calmly explains that if they force demons to expel waste unnaturally, they may lose the ability to go again, and they need to keep producing as much waste as possible. Hartok releases the demon and tells Bal that this is the first intelligent thing he's ever said. Then, unleashing a wicked aura, he suggests making the other demons eat this one's flesh. Maybe that'll help them produce something. Bal stares at him coldly, without a hint of fear in his eyes. The two then lunge at each other, but Krytos intervenes, using Bloodstrike on both of them, demanding to know what they were thinking. The impact of the skill knocks them down, leaving them sprawled on the ground, unable to rise. The scene shifts to inside the Demon King's palace, where Krytos tells them that waste lacking in nutrients is useless. They need excrement that can actually be used as fertilizer. Zephyros looks puzzled and asks, "What's fertilizer?" Krytos replies that it's a substance that feeds the earth and helps plants grow. He explains that common fertilizer components include sawdust, certain weeds, sand, eggshells, and bird droppings. He adds that sawdust and weeds can be easily gathered from ruined homes, but the real problem lies in getting eggshells and poultry droppings. An idea strikes him. He asks Zephyros to bring him a map of their territory. When Krytos looks at it, he remarks that it's identical to the game's map, which means that if they head to the demonic seagull colony, they'll find an overwhelming number of gulls there. He explains that during his in-game explorations, he saw them everywhere in the fields, indicating they feed well in the human lands. The gulls then return to their nests to lay eggs and leave behind their droppings. Zephyros, visibly confused, asks if Krytos really plans to gather seagull poop and eggs. Krytos laughs and replies, "Sharp as always. That's exactly the plan." Zephyros then warns him that the place those gulls inhabit is called the Cliff of No Return. It earned its name because the land there crumbles easily, making it impossible to get a foothold. If anything falls, the waves drag it away. Krytos replies that he's well aware, and continues thinking to himself that this zone had always been off limits in the game, inaccessible due to system restrictions. But now, he can finally climb those mountains. The scene shifts to the Cliff of No Return, where Krytos stands with the commanders, none of them aware of what's going through his mind. For generations, demons tried to hunt seagulls there, but each attempt ended in death, as they slipped off the cliffs and were swallowed by the raging sea. Krytos then informs them that he will climb to the top and throw down bags filled with seagull eggs and droppings. They just need to catch them carefully and make sure nothing falls into the sea. With a wicked grin, he tells them, "If this works, you'll feast like kings." Krytos heads toward the mountain, recalling how, on his 13th run of the game, he desperately tried to climb this very place. As he runs, he adds that he must have attempted it hundreds of times, only to die each and every time. Then, he leaps off the cliff, remembering that he did eventually succeed. He'd pulled it off by exploiting a glitch in the game. He opens his equipment inventory and strips off all his clothing. The commanders are baffled, unable to understand what he's planning. But when they see him entering the mountain completely naked, their expressions twist with visible disgust. Krytos then turns his body around. Circe quickly averts her gaze, not wanting to see him exposed, but he soon opens his inventory again and puts his clothes back on. Then, he spins once more, undresses, spins again, and redresses, repeating this over and over until he finally reaches the top. Standing confidently at the summit, he announces that he'd used this trick before, and was sure it would work again here. This world still allows him to open the gear window and manipulate it freely, which enabled his success. Zephyros is stunned by what just happened, while Baal beams with joy, saying that Krytos promised he'd bring them food, and that's why he's decided to climb up and help. Baal sprints ahead, copying Krytos' every move, as Zephyros tries in vain to stop him. Baal dashes toward the edge, jumps, and mimics everything Krytos did, but Krytos yells at him not to do that at all. The rocks beneath Baal give way, and he begins to fall. Krytos grabs his hand just in time, stopping him from plunging into the sea. But he can't hold on for long. Baal is far too heavy. Doubt creeps in. Why is he even trying to save him? After all, Baal is one of the 4 commanders. Maybe it would be better if he just let go. So why did his body move on its own to catch him? Then, he remembers what happened before entering the game, when one of his classmates broke down in tears, saying the professor wouldn't let him submit his paper, wanting to keep him a servant forever. The boy begged him to speak to the professor, since he was the only one the professor liked and listened to. Through his tears, he insisted that the professor respected Krytos, and might actually listen to him. Krytos recalls how the student was younger than him, always by his side, and how he really could have helped, since he was essentially servant number 2 in the professor's eyes. But he refused to help, telling the boy it was his problem to deal with. The real reason he refused was fear of being cast aside. But now, he realizes he should have done whatever it took to help that boy. If he'd pushed himself harder, gone beyond his limits, maybe that boy could have cried from joy instead of pain. With a sharp grunt, Krytos strains and pulls Baal upward, his arm nearly breaking from the weight. But at last, he manages to haul him up to the top of the mountain. He then climbs up himself, clutching his throbbing arm in pain. Baal looks at him and says that Krytos saved him and got hurt doing it, even though he had no real reason to. He asks, why? Krytos replies, gripping his hand, that abandoning someone who follows you, only to regret it later, hurts far more. Baal is deeply moved by the words, tears welling in his eyes. Krytos thinks of the boy and quietly tells himself he should have done the same for him, and offers a sincere apology. a new message appears, stating that although his body has not yet fully adapted to that of the Demon King, he has already pushed himself to the limit. As a result of what he had done, Krytos earned the genuine gratitude of Commander Baal, and Krytos couldn't believe just how deeply the moment had affected him. Because of this achievement, a new system was activated, a reward system for the Demon King's army. When his army is happy, Krytos gains a large number of happiness points. Krytos is baffled by the sudden appearance of this new system. He stares at the system window explaining happiness points, vaguely remembering they were used to get discounts, like buying ice cream maybe. But there's probably no one selling ice cream in a place like this. He's even more shocked when the system replies, telling him the points can be spent on upgrades and perks. For instance, he currently has access to only 20% of the Demon King Krytos' full power, and the system urges him to try raising it to 100%. Krytos agrees and decides to test the system by attempting to increase his stamina by 10 levels. But the system notifies him that doing so requires 50 happiness points. He also learns that he can use points to upgrade skills. For example, upgrading Bloodstrike would cost 250 happiness points. Krytos can't act just yet, but if the farming plan succeeds, he could earn tons of points, making him far stronger and increasing his odds of survival. Plus, the feeling of being genuinely thanked by someone, that's something he's starting to truly appreciate. Watching him closely is Baal, who now sees, based on Krytos' expression, that if he dares disobey him, Krytos might tear him apart. He owes him his life, and there's no way this demon saved him for free. Krytos calls down to the 4 commanders, informing them he's placing the waste inside a large eggshell and tossing it down from above. He urges them to catch it carefully, and as he tosses it, the commanders begin to wonder how much more of this they can endure. But Krytos keeps flinging down eggshells filled with waste, reminding them that the first step in manual industry is preparing the raw materials, which include seagull eggshells, excrement, beech tree ash, and prepping the soil. Then, everything is ground and mixed together. Krytos asks Serki to grind and mix all the components. She's stunned, and asks if he really means for her to do that. He replies, she has plenty of arms, surely she can put them to use. Furious, Serki screams at him, demanding how the Ice Queen Serki could possibly use her noble arms to mix excrement. Krytos replies with a terrifying tone that since she insists, he'll give her an easier task. He points toward Asarath, telling her she could just stand there, next to him, and do nothing but stay still. The moment she hears this, Serki immediately starts grinding and mixing the ingredients, saying nothing, but unleashing all her fury on the work itself. Krytos sighs, thinking he was genuinely scared for a second. These commanders' tempers are not to be underestimated, and he must never lower his guard around them. Still, he is the great Demon King Krytos, and he'll continue to push forward with courage and strength until he achieves his goals. The next step in fertilizer prep is adding water. Krytos instructs Hartok to fill the air with mist. Hartok groans that the smell will be unbearable, and the humidity will make things worse. Why even do this? Krytos cuts him off, pointing to Asarath, still hanging like a kebab skewer, and warns Hartok he might be next. Instantly, without another word, Hartok begins spreading mist and increasing the surrounding humidity. Krytos turns to Commander Baal and asks if the humidity is now sufficient. Baal replies that the soil has indeed softened after being soaked with water, just as expected. The third step, then, is to place the fertilizer in a dry location and cover it with a blanket made of seagull feathers. But there's a current issue standing in their way. Producing even a small amount of fertilizer takes an extremely long time, and to create enough to cover this vast area, Krytos will have no choice but to rally a large number of demons to assist. Still, something's bothering him, and he decides to take action now, exercising his authority as Demon King. In one of the humble demon homes, a father sits by his sick daughter's bed. When she calls for him, he gently asks what she needs. His daughter, Flute, pale and frail, asks him to eat her, since both of them are starving and too weak to go on. The father responds in anguish, begging her not to speak such nonsense again. But Flute tells him that her mother misses her dearly. She remembers the time a monstrous demon attacked her and was about to devour her. When her mother stood between them to shield her, she gave Flute one last sorrowful look, as if to say goodbye. That was the last time Flute ever saw her, devoured right before her eyes. Her father tells her that without her presence, he wouldn't have had the strength to go on. Their moment is abruptly interrupted as Demon King Krytos enters the house, shocking the father into screaming, unsure of what's happening. Krytos states that if he has the energy to scream, then he still has strength left, and orders his soldiers to seize him. The terrified father pleads that if he's taken away, his daughter Flute will be left defenseless. Higher-ranked demons might exploit the situation and devour her. Krytos shows no concern, and takes the father despite the cries of both Flute and her father. He then asks Zephyros how many demons have been gathered so far. Zephyros answers that they've rounded up 20 so far, 30 more remain. Krytos glances back, and sees Flute collapsed in tears at her doorstep, devastated by her father's sudden capture. The sight stirs a memory from the game, when the player encounters this same child, Flute, and one of their missions is to slaughter every demon in the area, including her. Kratos leaves the scene and orders his forces to cease all illegal acts, especially the consumption of their own kind. He tells Zephyros to gather the rest of the demons and instructs them to begin producing fertilizer immediately. His only thought is that he is the Demon King, the tyrant of this land, and he will do whatever it takes to reach his goal. A true leader chooses which sacrifices must be made, and makes them without hesitation. The demons begin making fertilizer, though they feel it's a complete waste of their energy. To them, farming is a pointless and pathetic endeavor, but fear keeps them silent, lest the Demon King sever their heads. One of them remarks that they're doomed either way. Even if the land somehow becomes fertile, what exactly can they grow here? They have nothing to plant. Kratos overhears this, and asks if they're really that curious about what he intends to plant. He tells the skeptic to follow him if he wants to find out. Kratos remembers the purple flower he saw when he turned to spot the 4 commanders, spying on him during his use of Bloodstrike, and that flower has now become their farming target. The demon farmer asks if that's the intended crop, and Kratos confirms it is. He explains that these are the plant's roots, and that Baal and several farming squads retrieved them from multiple locations. The farmer apologetically replies that the roots of this plant are likely inedible. Consuming them causes severe stomach pain and can be fatal. Kratos replies that unfortunately, there's nothing else left on this land worth chewing, and odds are, they've just completed the experiment to see if this plant is edible. The farmer looks puzzled by Kratos' words and asks what experiment he's referring to. Kratos responds in a chilling tone. His daughter is eating the plant right now. The father is stunned, unable to believe what he's hearing, and sprints toward his home. Not understanding why the Demon King would do such a thing to his innocent daughter, he prays with all his heart that she hasn't eaten it. But as soon as he bursts through the door, shouting at Flute not to eat it, he's shocked by the sight before him. Flute sits calmly, eating the plant as if it were an ordinary meal, with no pain, just genuine fullness. He nervously asks his daughter if she's truly okay. Flute responds innocently, "Commander Zephyros and Commander Baal brought her the food yesterday, fed it to her, and she felt perfectly fine." Kratos arrives at that moment and asks the father if he believes him now. He explains that long ago, the people of a certain land found a way to make this poisonous plant edible. They learned how to cultivate it and solved their hunger crisis with it. That plant is now known as the potato. Flute tells Kratos she can't believe someone like him would show such kindness to a lowly creature like her, and thanks him from the bottom of her heart. Immediately, a notification appears to Kratos. A portion of his demonic army has experienced joy after eating, and thus, his happiness points have risen for the first time. Kratos feels a rush of happiness himself, realizing that being the Demon King doesn't mean he always has to be serious. So he replies to Flute in a mockingly cold tone that contrasts with his true feelings. A pathetic little thing like you should eat, grow taller, and get healthy. Flute shudders in fear, and both Baal and Zephyros flinch as well, convinced Kratos is fattening her up to devour her later. He is, after all, an evil Demon King. In the deep heart of the Demon Kingdom, known as Shavin de Antor, this region is divided into 5 zones, with Shavin de Antor lying at the very core. It endures a frozen night and a scorching daytime heat, a climate much like the Andes highlands. In the past, the people of those highlands lacked food and were driven to eat wild, poisonous potatoes. But thanks to humanity's ability to transform even toxic substances into edible, flavorful meals, not all of them perished. They discovered how to neutralize the poison. And so, Demon King Kratos carries on his farming mission, securing sustainable food for the demons and tackling the hunger crisis. A farmer informs him the tubers are now in place. Kratos commands Baal to begin crushing them at once, and Baal doesn't hesitate for a second. He starts stomping on the tubers, following the established plan. Freeze them at night, then use Baal's force in the morning to crush them, allowing the poison in the potatoes to break down and evaporate. The potatoes are gathered, frozen, then thawed, tasted, and finally steamed, a process repeated over and over, until the potatoes dry out and can be stored before cooking. Thus, the chuño process is completed, turning wild potatoes into something edible. Kratos orders Zephyros to gather the fertilizer teams, because mealtime has arrived. The farmers line up, and Kratos tells them that since there aren't many tubers, each of them can only take 2 pieces. Zephyros replies that there's still a large stockpile of potatoes left, and asks if they could make more. Kratos answers that he doubts the remaining amount is enough, especially since they're not yet producing enough to feed an entire army of demons. That's why they must plant the remaining potatoes, and multiply them 1,000-fold. The farmers glance at their plates, murmuring that this is the poisonous part of the plant. They wonder if it's truly safe to eat, recalling that many of their relatives died from consuming it in the past. Flute's father responds that the Demon King has altered the plant, making it safe now, and that his own daughter, Flute, ate it without harm. One farmer objects, asking him to just look at the Demon King's face and expression. Does that look like the face of someone giving us food? He looks like he's waiting for us to eat, then drop dead one after another. But Flute's father interrupts, takes a bite of the potato Krytos provided, and swallows it as the other farmers watch him anxiously, waiting to see if he'll be poisoned. But nothing bad happens. In fact, his eyes well up with tears of joy, and he salutes the Demon King for what he's done for them. After seeing someone eat the wild potatoes safely, the entire farming team begins devouring the chuño with excitement. They cheer for Krytos, praise him, and thank him for the food, even chanting a song that honors him as their king. Krytos listens seriously, but deep down, he doesn't like the chant. They'll need a new one eventually. Zephyros also notices Krytos' expression, one of quiet confidence. He now truly believes Krytos may be able to provide real food in this barren land, and maybe even end the hunger-driven suffering. Due to the farmers' joy after their long struggle, Krytos' happiness points rise by 20. Krytos is overwhelmed. 20 points is no small amount, and he genuinely feels stronger already. He opens his system window, checks his stats, and considers which skill to invest in next, but decides to keep accumulating points for now. Then, he plans to split the fertilizer team from the potato gathering team, but Zephyros interrupts him, calling out to the farmers. He orders them to return to their villages once their tasks are done, and spread the word. It's now possible to grow edible food on this land, and those who bring back wild potatoes will receive food vouchers that can be exchanged for chuño. Krytos is impressed by Zephyros' thinking. Though he's definitely annoying, he's clearly the most useful among the commanders, especially since the village demons will now search for wild potatoes as hard as they can, for Krytos' sake. Meanwhile, the other commanders will keep producing edible chuño, and the rest will continue making fertilizer for cultivation. Krytos moves the pole where Asurath is still hanging and gives instructions to the farmers to place it in a spot ideal for lightning generation. Then, he activates Bloodstrike to summon lightning and generate the nitrogen needed for fertile soil. After finally producing enough fertilizer, it's time for the next step, spreading it widely across the land. But the area is vast, an enormous space for farmers surviving on just a few balls of chuño, making the task daunting. Asurath snarls at Krytos, calling him disgusting and asking him to just kill him already. Krytos zaps him with lightning and resumes thinking. What he now needs is a great demon commander, someone who performs well even when starving, even without rest, and can work for hours. So he has no choice left but to turn to that individual. Back in the palace, Krytos asks Zephyros whether he really sent a request for backup from the Lords of the Stars. Zephyros confirms he did. He requested a halt to all attacks, and asked for as many troops as possible to help with farming. However, even though messengers were sent to all 4-star commanders overseeing the regions, no response has come back yet. Krytos considers the possibility that the messengers who were sent out may have collapsed and died of hunger on the way. Even so, he knows they desperately need this plan to succeed, because spreading fertilizer over such a vast expanse will be incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, in the Demon Lands, specifically in the 1st star zone, deep within the Cliff of the Dead, a servant arrives before the region's ruler to report that, according to scout reports, the Demon King has officially begun farming. He adds that it's likely they've already started producing food. The ruler responds that Krytos is doing all of this out of fear, because he knows the ruler's power has grown, and demon deaths have sharply increased. That's why Krytos stopped the war, to reduce the number of demon casualties. He also began cutting back on the number dying from starvation, all because he fears the 1st Star Lord, Saruthal. Saruthal asks his servant whether he handled the 30 messengers sent to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th star zones. The servant replies that he eliminated all of them, ensuring the other region lords know nothing about the war's end or the farming project. Saruthal replies coldly that all demons should starve, only then can they serve as food for him and his army. Then he'll kill Krytos and become the next Demon King. He orders his servant Vecamir to destroy every trace of Krytos' agricultural effort. Vecamir arrives in Krytos' lands and sees Asurath, remarking that Krytos is cruel enough to leave him as a living corpse, just to serve as a warning to others. He tells Asurath not to worry, as Lord Saruthal is impressed by his aggression and plans to recruit him once Krytos is eliminated. Vecamir then summons his ghostly spirits and orders them to destroy everything, leaving nothing usable behind. One of the spirits points out the human fertilizer the scouts had mentioned earlier. Vecamir orders them to gather it and scatter it everywhere. He commands them to spread it evenly across the land, just in case Krytos tries to recollect it. It must be deeply mixed into the soil. He warns them not to leave even a single particle exposed, and to bury it deep underground. Then Vecamir lets out a wicked laugh, but Asurath stares at him in disbelief, because he remembers a conversation between Krytos and Zephyros about how essential it was to grind the fertilizer thoroughly and bury it deep into the soil, that it was an incredibly difficult task, one the farming team couldn't possibly do alone, but now, they won't need to. Vecamir's ghost army has just done all the work for them, thinking they were destroying it. The ghosts begin digging, burying the fertilizer deep into the ground, whispering among themselves that if Krytos were to find even a single chunk of fertilizer, he could turn this whole region into fertile farmland. One ghost turns to another, remarking that his enthusiasm today is unusual, like he's actually working hard this time. The other ghost replies, genuinely agreeing, saying he feels proud looking at everything they've accomplished, finally doing something that actually matters. That infectious excitement spreads to the rest of the ghosts, who resume their work with renewed passion. They become so immersed in their task that they don't even notice the sunrise, as the sun's rays begin to burn them. They find themselves frozen in place, unable to escape. But before they vanish, they say they're at peace with this ending, because they finally did something worthwhile. Vesemir arrives moments later, heartbroken at their sacrifice, mourning their courageous deaths. He tells them they've done their part, and now, he says he can't wait to see Krytos' reaction. The scene shifts to the potato storage room. Krytos and Zephyros stand inside, and Krytos remarks that plowing the fields took far longer than expected, and that the potatoes before them are currently dormant. Zephyros is confused, prompting Krytos to explain that dormant means the potatoes won't sprout. They're currently useless for farming. He compares it to a potato peacefully asleep underground, only to be yanked out suddenly by some mischievous hand, causing the poor thing to faint from shock, leaving it unable to reproduce. Krytos thinks aloud, saying that the dormancy period would end more quickly if they left the potatoes for 2 or 3 weeks at 4 degrees Celsius, then move them to a warm, dark place. He adds that he'd ask Circe to use her ice magic, but she's in a foul mood. And Hartok seems to be scheming as well. If both turn on him at once, he won't be able to handle it, so he needs a backup plan. He says he had the workers doing squats to try and raise the room's temperature to 23 degrees Celsius, but they exhausted themselves quickly, and the plan failed. Krytos tells Zephyros they're heading to the farm now. He's going to do what he can. At the very least, he wants to mix nitrogen into the soil. But the moment they arrive, Krytos is stunned by what he sees. The fertilizer has been completely blended into the soil, filling the entire area with an overpowering stench. In complete awe, Krytos says a miracle has occurred. The land is now ready for planting. Watching Krytos' amazement, Vesemir feels a rush of pride, convinced their sabotage worked flawlessly. But suddenly, Bal appears behind him. He grabs Vesemir by the collar, drags him over to Krytos, and reveals that he had been hiding. Krytos is shocked to see him, and notes that Vesemir is one of the leaders of the Cliff of the Dead. He wonders if he came willingly after hearing about the call for reinforcements. He asks Vesemir why he's really here, but Vesemir freezes in fear. Before he can utter a word, Krytos lands a punch straight to his face. Zephyros asks Krytos why he punched Vesemir before even giving him a chance to explain. Krytos replies that he had a feeling Vesemir was hiding something, and sometimes, hitting first is the fastest way to get someone to confess. Vesemir responds that such behavior is exactly what he expects from the Demon King, but he won't talk so easily. Krytos starts beating him continuously while Bal holds him down, giving Krytos full freedom to unleash his blows. Krytos keeps hitting him until he grows tired, then uses his happiness points to increase his stamina, just so he can keep going. Eventually, Vesemir breaks and admits he was sent to sabotage Krytos' farm. The scene shifts to the Demon King's palace, where Krytos tells Zephyros that it was Saruthal who rejected the support request. He adds that he understands Saruthal's motives. After all, the more demons starve, the stronger Saruthal becomes. Zephyros replies that Saruthal's actions are basically an act of rebellion, and this could be Krytos' chance to defeat the first Star Lord and send a clear message to the rest of the demon realm. Krytos considers this and thinks to himself, if he lets them get away with what they've done, they'll remain a constant threat to his farming project. He'll need a proper plan to deal with them. Zephyros adds that the real issue now is how to defeat Saruthal, since he has the ability to shift into a ghost-like form. Krytos says that in the game, Saruthal could be found all throughout the Cliff of the Dead, a naturally confusing area, and he'd turned the entire fight into a game of hide-and-seek. But if the problem is luring out the plague, then the only solution is to bait him out of his nest. We then cut to Flute, the young girl, who has wandered from her home and made her way to the farm, where Asarath remains. As she gets too close, he growls and asks why she's here, and what's with the way she's looking at him. She gently tells him she heard his sacrifice was the reason they got food, and she bows to thank him from the bottom of her heart. Asarath flares up, screaming that she's mocking him, and threatens to kill her to free himself. The frightened girl runs away, crying. He snarls that the moment he's free, he's going straight to kill Krytos, who caused all of this. But suddenly, he hears Krytos' voice in the distance. Krytos appears, dragging Vesemir, tied to a wooden pole just like Asarath, while dancing and clapping with the workers. Asarath is stunned to see someone else also being used as a lightning rod. Filled with hope, he smiles and says he's finally going to be freed. No way they'll keep him hanging like this all day now. Krytos approaches Asarath and places Vesemir beside him, then uses Bloodstrike on both of them at once. Only then does Asarath realize he completely misunderstood. Krytos didn't come to free him, he just brought someone else to hang up next to him. The scene then cuts to Saruthal, watching as his loyal servant Vesemir is tortured by Krytos, and his fury begins to boil. Kratos casts another strike and Fikimir starts moaning, "What a hero," while Saul is screaming, "Stop," with tears rolling down his eyes. Kredto glances over saying that that's the reconnaissance wraith from the game, and it looks like they're keeping a close watch, and he'll make sure they regret messing with his harvest in the first place. Sometime later, we see Flute digging in the field, and Asuret looks down at her. He notices that her hands are all scarred up and dirty, and he asks her what she's doing. She starts to think about it, saying that since the Demon King and the 4 heavenly generals and all the other adults are working hard on farming, she wanted to help somehow. Asuret calls her a stupid low-ranking demon brat, saying that the beside him already plowed the field and she should at least do something useful. She walks over to Fikimir, thanking him, saying that he plowed the field and became a lightning rod for them, and she's so grateful. He's confused but rolls with it, saying that she's such a cutie and she made all that hard work worth it. Asuret says this dude's already lost his mental. Asuret asks what's the big deal about plowing some field, asking if she really thinks farming in this wasteland is possible and whatever they're trying to grow will not sprout. They say if you keep the potato seeds warm, these sprouts will grow quickly, but they're all going to starve to death anyways. She runs away, thanking him as he calls out to her, happily running off, then laughs, asking what can a low-ranking demon even do. Elsewhere at the castle, Zephys says that he has a slight concern about his plan and that Saul must know that this is a trap, asking if he will even come to rescue Fikimir. Kratos says, of course not. First, he'll send his subordinates, and if they want him to come out himself, they need to eliminate every single one that he sends, and they should leave none alive. As we see Bale keeping guard over the lightning rods, the reconnaissance wraith is floating overhead, and Saul calls Kratos a fool, asking if he really thinks that just waiting around will make his subordinates appear. While it's unfortunate for Fikimir, he only has one true goal, and that is for him to ruin the harvest. He then sends out his crop wraiths to the storage warehouse, and as the little Murloc things waddle over, they go into full-blown creative flight, going straight towards the door as their plan is to crush the potatoes and trample them into oblivion. They phase through the doorway and are now standing in the storage room, and Kratos says it's just as he expected. They're surprised, and he says that he knew the crop wraiths would appear, and that he's grateful they walked into their own graves. They start to look panicked, and he says the first time he encountered these, he felt pure despair, and that this is his second elite force. The real problem is that they always move in swarms. Even if they touch you physically, they'll latch on and rapidly age you. Not to mention, they copy the skills you have equipped, and they're a complete nuisance. But there is one way to wipe them out, and he asks who wants to be fried first as he just needs to attack them with lightning-based items. They realize it's a trap and begin trying to run away. But Kredto screams no, as the real trap is what comes next. They look back towards the door, seeing there's nothing but blood covering it now, and it's the blood that he was smearing before. Kratos says it's now for his Phase 2 ability. As he scratches his hand, he slaps the blood beneath him and it starts engulfing the trail of blood he left behind like gasoline and fire until it reaches the front door. Then it creates a massive Oshok field, zapping the wraiths, and it's called the Wide Area Bloody Strike. Kratos says now they can hit them with physical attacks, telling the farm guards to lock in. They burst through the door like they're the Kool-Aid Man, and we see the wraiths are now no longer in a spectral form. KTO says the farm guards may look unimpressive, but they're the strongest units in the final map as they are literally ripping apart the crop wraiths. Kredto says that he really does feel like a ruthless, smart alpha demon king. I can't believe Buddy just said that, and he says maybe he actually fits well into this world, but there are quite a few wraiths that have not been fried yet. He goes out of his way to strike them personally, revealing their form, and as they fall to the floor, he hears somebody screaming. When he turns, surprised, we see none other than Flute sticking her head out from all of the potatoes. He wonders what she's doing, since when she's been here. As one of the wraiths goes to attack her, Direct screams out for her and Kratos says there's always these clueless ones, and right now the priority is to eliminate as many escaping crop wraiths as possible. But there's no way he can just leave her be, but he can't exactly bloody strike because it's too far. He throws a potato directly towards the wraith's head and wonders what he's even trying to achieve by throwing it. Somehow it bonks it on the head and the wraith starts to latch onto the potato, rapidly aging it, growing it. Kratos is surprised by this as we see it actually has fully matured the potato sprout. And then the wraith, exhausted, falls down onto the floor beside Flute. As the other wraiths go to escape his storage warehouse, Kratos is just surprised, asking if it really just sprouted. Then it clicks in his head and he says that they accelerate aging and it just jump-started the biological clock of the potatoes when they were stalled. He picks Flute up and tells her that she has done an amazing job with the warmest smile of all time, and she begins crying tears of joy. He throws her off to the ground, telling the farm guards to listen up and that they should forget luring Saul out. From now on, they're going to go on the offensive as that will benefit them way more. Then he grabs a handful of potatoes. A little later, we hear Asuret's voice asking where he is and who he even is, wondering what he's living for. He says, "The sun is so beautiful," and of course, he's so grateful just to face it. His stomach begins to rumble, and he says that even in this state, he still has a craving for life. He hears Flute calling out to him, saying that thanks to his advice about the potato sprouts, everything worked out great and she even got tons of food. Kredtos gathered a ton of farmer soldiers and went off to sprout potatoes. Asuret sees the basket full of food she has brought and starts to go crazy, snapping at the fact that there's just food. She says he must be hungry and that she'll give this to him. As she raises it into the air, she eats it forward. It hits him directly in the eyeball instead of his mouth and he starts screaming, straight tweaking out, saying that he's going to kill her. She says she's sorry and that she'll throw another one, only for her to throw 3 back, each going into his eyeballs and the other one going into his mouth. As he starts crying tears, he says that it's so tasty. Credo sees a status window appearing saying that his army feels happy from eating. He has been given 1 point for that and he now has 302. Credo says, including newly added recruits from the last round that received food, that would be 300 demons. He says one of them is that kid, asking who the other one is, but says whoever it is, the more the better. They'll need to save it for the Saw raid. He tells the Farmer Corps to advance as it's time for them to have a bountiful harvest. They make their way to Saw's territory as we see a bridge ahead of them. The little ghouls start doing their best to cut the bridge off, and as they swing their axes, they laugh, asking what they'll do now without a bridge. Kratos is already leaping across in the air, only for him to slowly start falling down the cliff, and they laugh, calling him an idiot, saying that he just came and jumped down like a... Their laughter immediately goes into what the hell faces as Kratos is once again double-cheed up in the side of the wall. The little ghouls start sweating nervously, wondering what the hell they are looking at as he starts changing his position, rolling up the cliff with every single alternation being completely naked, and that this is a master predator at work getting his prey. He finally makes it up top and they start screaming, saying that was the nastiest thing they've ever seen in their life. And Kratos says it's just as he planned, and he points over to Zephys, who nods his head. Kratos says according to his strategic plan, the food wraiths should be terrified of the potatoes. But if he charged in all alone and unarmed, it would work. We hear Saul say he's alone and has no cursed potatoes, so they can go for him, and even just grazing him would mean victory. And as they flew in, it was time for his secret technique, the quantum leap move, as he starts gliding up the wall, confusing the wraiths because the final sight they see is nothing but cheeks until he goes invisible into the wall. They say that movement technique is insane, asking where he learned such a forbidden technique and say that he must be upstairs. They then continue doing their best after he re-emerges following him, but once again he's too fast. This is the equivalent of Barry Allen the Flash. They say that, and Kratos says this is the 19th time he's done this and he's seen every corner of this map, and if he combines all the areas where enemies appeared in the game into one single place as they all start swarming directly towards him, he stands there confidently. He takes a couple breaths. Saw says that he's tired now, and even if he's the Demon Lord, this is the end. Koss says that he's not the Demon Lord right now, but rather he is a veteran player. Zephys yells, telling his men, now's their chance. As all the farmers start throwing potatoes from the holes on the side of the cliffs and they start hitting the wraiths, sprouting in an instant, Kratos says that this is the greatest farm a man could have asked for, and it's very efficient. Zephys says at first he was unsure, but once again, Kratos' words were spot on. He said that when he herded them all to one place, he and the rest of the farmers should follow his map. Zephys says that the abandoned ancient aqueduct is a dead end and there's nothing there. But Kratos smiles, saying that that's fine because there is a secret shortcut that he will utilize. Kratos says after a capping from the Cliff of the Dead right before reaching the final map, he scoured the area. He found a wall that was made with too much detail to be not important. He swung on the wall, wondering why the texture there was different. If you've played Dark Souls, this is your point of view on every corner, and this tunnel connects the place where they had their first battle with Sophel to this cave. He wondered why he couldn't enter, but it turns out you can come in after clearing the area. You could obtain the Elixir of Metamorphosis, which is the compressed soul of countless dead meat piles, and it can only be consumed once, but who knows what might happen. As the farmers start picking up the sprouted potatoes, they begin screaming, saying that now they can plant. Dyra cries tears of joy, saying that he can finally live and eat his fill. Kredto stands there and starts to recall a woman saying that he's been starving so much. He's none other than reminiscing about his granny saying that he'll have a full dinner tonight and he should just wait. Then he was accompanied by sirens as he had to call an ambulance for her, and it's a very painful memory to him. Kratos says that anyone who tries to get in the way of him finally eating, he will make sure that they will be completely wrecked. Bale then calls out to him, and when Kratos turns, he warns him that Sule is strong, so he will help. Kratos tells him just to carry the potatoes as this is a job for the boss. Inside of Saul's main chamber, he starts calling out to the heart of the ice spirit, and he chants saying that he needs more power and troops only for Kratos to kick him in the face, slamming him into a nearby wall. Saw asks how he knew to come here. Kratos says that's none of his business, and it's time for him to exterminate the pest ruining his farming. Saw stares at him, and then calls him a fool, asking if he really came alone, thinking he could defeat him, and he begins changing shape into something else, warning him that he has yet to see his true power. Kato says that he has seen it 19 times. In fact, while chasing Saul, who keeps fleeing through the cliffs, they ended up constantly encountering his subordinates, and by the end, he wiped out all of the cliff mobs. Then he flees into this room where the heart of the ice spirit lies, and the so terrifying artifacts had to be created by an ancient dragon at the cost of its life. It is a chilling frost that traps dead spirits in this world. He tries to summon more followers using that power, but the paladin arrives just in time, and the final battle begins. He uses his true ability by then, as we see him still changing shape in the air. He tells Kratos that he is strong, which is why he is doing this to ensure that he himself is going to win this battle. As he turns into Kratos, we learn that he perfectly copies his opponent's stats and materializes into them. This is the endgame. And at this point, he has the same stats as his character, which are at their peak, with insane attack power and nearly broken evasion skill. Just one mistake and you are instantly dead. However, the current stats he has are none other than his, who is not strong at all. As Saul starts to charge in while screaming, Kratos then opens the stat window to upgrade them using his points. He has 302 points, and he uses 50 to upgrade his dexterity by 10%. He dodges Saul's attack and then returns with a punch straight to his gut while screaming. He then upgrades his physical strength by 10% using 50 points. As Saul comes in for a punch, Kratos meets it fist to fist. Saul starts screaming, asking why the hell he is still perfectly fine, and Kratos tells him that farming requires brains too. Saul in a panic starts to scream bloody strike trying to activate the ability. Kratos then uses 100 points to upgrade his power and mental strength by 10% each. As they both cast a bloody strike at one another, creating a giant electricity field in between them, Saul screams and gets completely engulfed by the attack and starts to melt directly in front of him into a little puddle.
Reduced to a viscous pool. His form now resembled that of gelatinous goo. At that moment, Kratos was informed that he had expended his HP to elevate all of his core attributes to a uniform level of 30%. Then, a notification appeared. His development quest was now fulfilled. As a consequence, a fresh ability had become accessible. Summon Farmer's Throne, which required 100 HP to unlock. This throne, a clear homage to Game of Thrones, was armed with an array of sturdy agricultural instruments. Kratos found the timing fortuitous, as he was in need of superior equipment. Even as a puddle, Saruthal still had the ability to speak. He addressed Kratos, questioning whether he believed the battle had concluded. Kratos responded in the negative. He was well aware that all second-phase encounters had a follow-up transformation. Saruthal's mask shifted again, now transforming into an archaic, malevolent dragon. He claimed that this was his true origin. Kratos was stunned. Witnessing it firsthand, the creature's offensive capability and reservoir of vitality were staggering. But it was expected. Saruthal served as the boss directly preceding the game's ultimate antagonist. Kratos, however, felt no dread. That was precisely when Baal and the agricultural enforcers arrived. He informed Saruthal that he had already emerged from the final stage himself. Then he issued a challenge. What could Saruthal possibly do now? Saruthal froze. Overwhelmed by the sight of reinforcements, he began to panic. He pleaded for a conversation to negotiate. But his appeal came too late. The farm enforcers stormed toward him, impelled by their yearning for a successful yield. They unleashed their accumulated frustration on Saruthal for disrupting their tilling. Saruthal begged for leniency. Kratos recognized that he could overcome Saruthal through direct combat, but the entity's capacity for speech and motion gave him pause. It didn't feel right to destroy it with his own hands. Still, he observed that his comrades were too malnourished to land efficient strikes. They had been battering Saruthal for some time now, yet he refused to perish. He contemplated a more effective tactic. Kratos activated the Summon Farmer's Throne skill, draining 100 HP and leaving him with just 2 points. A beam of verdant luminescence descended from the heavens, slowly lowering the throne. Then, without warning, it plummeted with explosive velocity. Kratos flinched in astonishment. The throne landed squarely atop Saruthal, generating a crater upon impact. The farm guards exulted. One demon jubilantly praised their monarch for not allowing Saruthal to simply expire, but instead, annihilating him with a brutal, skull-crushing blow. They admired how ruthless, savage, and infernal the move was, worthy of a true overlord. Another cried out that such a feat could only be pulled off by the Demon King himself, and that lesser beings like them could never imitate such dominance. They chanted Kratos' name in triumph. He blended with the celebration, shouting with pride. Elsewhere, among the lightning-bound, Fikimir came to a realization. With his superior defeated, he now understood that it was time for his own ascension. By now the entire farmland had been cultivated. The purpose of Lightning Rod number 2 had been fulfilled. With the raid concluded, their principal objective was achieved. The potato shoots had sprouted, and Kratos had successfully eliminated every blight that jeopardized the upcoming yield. With those hurdles overcome, he exclaimed with fervor that it was the moment to sow the tubers. Yet before they could vacate the premises, the crystalline orbs situated upon the pedestal stirred. Kratos took notice. A notification appeared, confirming that his objective of vanquishing Saruthal on the Cliff of the Departed for the 20th instance had now been fulfilled. That led him to wonder whether he had simply resumed from the 19th attempt in the game. The system then alerted him of a concealed scenario now being unlocked. A sealed essence confined within the core of Frozen Spirit had been released due to mishandling. The Heart of Ice began to emit vapor. Its structure opened gradually. As Kratos approached, he was met with astonishment. A diminutive azure hatchling emerged. He stood speechless, eyes wide in disbelief. The juvenile dragon noticed him. With excitement it uttered a name, T-Bone. Their gazes locked in stillness. The small WRM pondered if this bizarre entity before him might be his parent. As Kratos extended his hand, the little one shuddered with sensitivity. The dragon remembered hatching from its shell in pitch blackness, overwhelmed with fear, yet now relieved that its father had found him. That sense of comfort quickly faded once it got a good look at Kratos' unfortunate visage. Even though Kratos made an admiring remark about the creature's cuteness, the hatchling quaked in apprehension. As the group began to exit the chamber, the overzealous agricultural enforcers jokingly hollered about cooking the baby drake. This left the creature misty-eyed. Kratos rebuked them, labeling them fools, and reminded them that raising the beast first would yield greater returns. This, of course, led the little one to suspect that its supposed caretaker might actually intend to consume it. Kratos came to a halt when he noticed the awaiting crowd. The demons had gathered to welcome back the farming corps, their expressions sincere with joy. Fluck ran directly into her father's arms. Families reunited in warmth and relief. The baby dragon's cheeks turned rosy as it sensed the shared affection in the air. He glanced up at the figure holding him, realizing that perhaps they weren't so frightening after all. That was until he looked once more at the face of his so-called guardian. His opinion reversed immediately. No, they were absolutely terrifying. As twilight descended, the hatchling trembled in a shadowy corner. He cautiously peeked out, only to catch sight of the demon sovereign's ominous expression again. It made the little dragon assume they were merely biding their time until he matured enough to be eaten. Meanwhile, the overlord himself was absorbed in thought, primarily concerning how to nourish the young drake. He had heard somewhere that juvenile dragons fed on polished minerals, yet there wasn't a single gemstone in sight. Only piles of corroded scrap littered the storage. Zephyros soon arrived to give his report. As anticipated, significant setbacks had arisen during the construction of embankments. To cultivate vegetation properly, earthen ridges were necessary, raised mounds lining the fields. Ideally, such structures required untainted soil, but their terrain was littered with fragments of stone. Despite their efforts, each attempt by the farm guards to dig deeper resulted in the emergence of more debris. The baby dragon misinterpreted the situation, thinking he was already being forced into labor like the others, though in reality, Kratos merely held him. The demon lord reflected that their terrain more closely resembled a coal excavation site than a field. At the current pace, merely removing the stones would take an eternity. Worse yet, relying so heavily on the workforce daily would rapidly deplete the store of chunios intended for incentives. Even the prospect of receiving backup from other high-ranking demons wouldn't solve the dilemma. A sinister expression again crept across Kratos' face. He daydreamed about being the protagonist in a fantasy serial, one with the ability to summon a magical companion. He imagined some sort of burrowing beast like a wombat, capable of clearing the stones effortlessly. The hatchling in his grasp visibly shook once more, unnerved by the increasingly dreadful countenance his parent was making. Kratos observed Fluke as she diligently dug into the terrain. Her expression was firm with resolve. He continued watching her and came to the realization that it was time to stop complaining and instead devise a solution. While he was immersed in his own reflections, a sudden cry pierced the air, razor squall. Kratos turned pale. A colossal whirlwind was barreling toward them, gaining speed rapidly. It slipped his mind completely. He had known that this expansive barren land occasionally produced vents that released slicing gales at random intervals, and getting caught in one would result in being torn to shreds in moments. He shouted for everyone to seek shelter behind the stone formations. They scrambled toward anything that could provide shadow and dropped low to the ground. Kratos also bolted for cover, but even though the slicing wind was still a distance away, the sheer force of the air pressure was staggering. What he had experienced during gameplay didn't even come close. This was a calamity of nature, the greatest peril to cultivation efforts. But amidst the chaos, he spotted Fluke dashing toward the incoming vortex. Credo's eyes widened. She wasn't fleeing, she was heading to Azurat. Her father took off after her. Irritation surged in Credo's at the reckless girl. Without hesitation, he handed the hatchling to his own father, instructing him to protect the young Drake, warning that anyone who pursued him would face consequences. Bale cried out in protest, warning Credos that the area was too treacherous, that death was likely. Credos was fully aware of the risk. But he couldn't bear the thought of losing either his vital lightning conductor or an essential laborer. Cultivation wasn't some peaceful, leisurely endeavor involving leisurely fruit picking. Fluke, struggling, attempted to move the pole, but her efforts were fruitless. Azurat shouted for her to abandon the attempt and escape. In Credo's mind, he likened both agriculture and survival to waging war. He yelled at the child to step aside, then drove his foot into the stake, shattering it. Azurat let out a piercing scream as he toppled, smacking the ground face first. The demon sovereign's cheek was sliced open. Fluke, though lacerated across her body, continued attempting to untie the restraints. Azurat insisted the knot was one of the binding types, so tight not even one of the 4 heavenly generals could release it. He was adamant she wouldn't succeed and told her again to retreat. Fluke gasped in shock as she was abruptly lifted. Credos had hoisted both her and the stake. The young WRM could sense the sheer exertion of strength. It knew its guardian was no paragon of durability. Blood poured from Credo's wounds as he let out a roar and sprinted with all the energy he could muster. The tiny Drake, understanding the toll on his caretaker's body, gazed in astonishment at how far the Demon King was willing to go for others. The bladed wind storm drew near. Credos ran, leaking crimson from his injuries as the storm approached with unrelenting speed. Eventually his body gave in. He collapsed, clutching Fluke tightly in his arms. The pole slipped from his grasp as he hit the dirt. The baby dragon flapped toward his guardian. He now perceived him as a benevolent being. The hatchling inched closer, then inhaled deeply and cried out the name T-Bone at the top of his lungs, unleashing a torrent of glacial wind. It clashed directly with the approaching razor storm. Credos sensed the violent wind current diminish. He concluded the young dragon had utilized its cryogenic breath to disrupt the upward drafts fueling the vortex. Meanwhile, the tiny creature continued its effort. Despite its small frame, the dragon released a remarkably potent blast of frigid air. At that moment, Credos resigned himself to his fate, understanding that such a feat might be overwhelming for a hatchling. The shredding wind loomed ever nearer. But then salvation arrived. 3 demons raced to their aid. Fluke's father lifted Credos, Zephyros swept up Fluke, and Baal carried Azurat. Alongside the infant dragon, they fled from the deadly storm, exerting every ounce of speed and strength they possessed. Later on, Credos was resting on his bed. 2 commanders approached him, both wearing sinister expressions. Hartok remarked that at last the demon overlord had drifted off, and that he would finally sever his head. Sergi concurred and mentioned that once they dealt with the remaining 2 fools, one of them would rise as the new demon monarch. They both pledged to remain partners until that moment. They pushed open the door and stepped into the chamber, immediately advancing toward the bed, ready to unleash their assaults. However, they froze midway, noticing something odd as the demon overlord had his eyes wide open with a chilling stare. They stood frozen, feeling as if they had been anticipated, yet chose to push forward since it might be their only shot. Just then, Bahal and Azurat entered the chamber, questioning what the 2 thought they were attempting. The towering figure warned that the demon overlord was resting peacefully and that they shouldn't interrupt him. He also added about the expression Credos made while dozing off, creepy enough to deserve the title of demon overlord even in slumber. With that, he stressed that if they dared disturb their master's rest, they would deeply regret it. The one wearing the monocle admitted he understood the muscle-bound brute's point, but questioned whether Azurat was in the same boat, considering siding with a demon overlord obsessed with agriculture. Azurat answered that he wasn't particularly thrilled about it, but owed his life to Credos, and thus was merely repaying that debt. Hartok then asked if he hadn't realized yet that this entire potato farming scheme was only causing chaos, certain that beyond failing, it would drive them all into famine. So he wished to know if that didn't bother him. Without delay, Azurat responded that things were simply like that, and recalled young Flute toiling so earnestly despite her age. For that reason he stated if they wished to survive, they had to be willing to risk their lives. Even though he preferred risking it in combat as that was simply his nature. The one with the monocle firmly declared they would regret that decision, then exited the room with Sergi. At that instant, the commanders heard a noise from the chamber and saw that the demon overlord had awakened. Kratos, bewildered, called out Azurat's name, and the general questioned whether he might have overheard their entire discussion, though he quickly clarified he wasn't supporting him or anything similar. He insisted that he was merely repaying what he owed or something along those lines. Nonetheless, Kratos, with a menacing glare, demanded to know what on earth the lightning rod was doing walking around. Azurat, puzzled, had no time to react before receiving a bloody strike so intense it was visible from outside the fortress. They left the room, with Bahal carrying the battered Azurat on his back. And the demon overlord stated that they couldn't waste any more time and urged to gather everyone to resume clearing the lands. The general then mentioned that in truth, the stones had already vanished and that Zephyros had taken care of it. He appeared puzzled upon hearing that, until he noticed his subordinate giving orders to the farming squads. Observing this, he moved closer and questioned the patrol about what had been done with all the stones. Zephyros gestured toward a certain direction, stating he was with a particular creature. From a distance, Kratos glanced over and asked if it was T-Bone. The young dragon carried as many stones as possible in his mouth and flew back repeatedly to fetch more. He figured he couldn't shield his father from the slicing wind since he was still too small. But he was determined to eat plenty so he could grow swiftly. While soaring, he realized his father was calling him and immediately changed course toward him, which made Kratos thrilled to see his child even while wearing a fearsome expression. He contemplated that the slicing winds didn't occur frequently, and that if his baby dragon kept watching the sky and released the icy breath at just the right moment, they might manage to block the hurricane, but he considered there was no alternative, since avoiding this would lead to an even bigger problem. Then Zephyros mentioned that the Chunho supply was running low and asked whether they should prepare more. Kratos answered that it wasn't necessary and pondered that the first challenge of farming was natural disasters, and the second was cost, hurdles they would need to conquer. Meanwhile, inside the fortress, Sergi rested in her chamber until she removed her helmet. She, a stunning blonde, shook out her hair and remarked that the stench of manure still clung to her even after so many days without stepping into the fields. At that instant, Kratos called at her door, saying they needed to discuss something. She found it odd, since the demon overlord had never come to her room before, so she questioned what he wanted, claiming they had nothing to discuss. He stated he truly needed her assistance and asked her to please open the door. She became enraged and ordered him to leave, but he insisted, warning her that he would enter. Sergi spun around, shouting that there was no reason for them to talk, until she saw Kratos nearly naked crossing the doorway and became frantic at the sight. She then demanded to know if he was insane for entering a woman's room like that. Immediately, he dropped to a crouch, prompting her to ask what on earth he was doing. Kratos explained that without her, he was helpless. She didn't understand and blushed furiously. Kratos reflected that in order to cut costs, he was even prepared to kneel since he urgently needed her sharp blade at that moment. Sergi, still flustered, said that if he needed it so desperately, she was willing to hear him out. He quickly noticed her reaction and couldn't believe she had suddenly changed her demeanor. They proceeded to the storage area and stood before the potatoes. Kratos requested her to slice the potatoes since they needed to be halved for planting. Upon hearing this, she flew into a rage, feeling completely deceived, while cursing the demon overlord with every possible insult. He attempted to clarify that the task was simple, and that she shouldn't cut potatoes with 3 or fewer sprouts, but if there were 4, then she could proceed. He stressed that she must keep in mind the number of sprouts on each side of the slice, since they needed to be evenly divided. After sharing the instructions, he held the potatoes and declared he would toss them. But Sergi firmly stated she never agreed to do that. Nevertheless, he threw them anyway and without time to react. She braced herself and, using remarkable skill, sliced all the potatoes perfectly in half, cutting with extreme accuracy that even left Kratos astonished. He began inspecting them one by one and questioned how she managed to slice so precisely. Turning toward her, he praised her once more, saying he had always known she was the only one capable of it. She thought about that half-hearted flattery and became wary, knowing she wouldn't fall for his sweet talk again, calling him a deceitful trickster. Instantly, he stood up with an intimidating aura and stepped closer to her. Then he grabbed a cloth and wiped his blade until it gleamed. The general felt flustered and asked what he was doing. He answered that potato juice had splashed on it and it needed to be cleaned. She, burning with embarrassment, wondered if he had lost his mind, unable to comprehend why he was acting this way, besides that look in his eyes, sincere, warm and intense. Kratos noticed the sword was now spotless and admitted that it felt satisfying, imagining that if the blade wasn't thoroughly cleaned, infections could spread to the potatoes. So it had to be washed meticulously. He approached her again and with a captivating gaze, asked her to please lend a hand, insisting she was the only one who could accomplish it. Inside, he thought she was the sole demon capable of cutting potatoes while also helping to store the chunos. Sergi, still blushing, took a deep breath and agreed to assist this time. Inwardly, she called the demon lord foolish. He rejoiced at her response and said he would fetch hot water and towels so they could spend the entire night cutting together. She simply couldn't understand why the demon lord was so thrilled, once again calling him silly. After that, they continued slicing all the potatoes, while Hartok watched from afar, seeing the two working in total harmony as they cut. He fumed at the sight, thinking Sergi had also become one of the pitiful fools, volunteering to serve the demon lord simply because she received a few compliments. Meanwhile, beneath the scorching sun, Azurat was still tied to the cross, contemplating what it meant to truly live and wondering what purpose a lightning rod had to keep existing since such a harsh life seemed worthless. Then Flute approached and mentioned that the elders had saved Chunos for him, and asked if he wanted to play the game of tossing them. He called her a brat and asked if she truly believed that a great general like him would ever play a game with a low-ranking demon, warning that he would devour her alive if she dared come closer. Regardless, she tosses the food, but it lands directly in his mouth. This infuriates him so much that he demands to know if she doesn't understand how to throw correctly, ordering her to do it properly. From a distance, the one with the monocle observes and concludes that Azurat has already lost his sanity, thinking he has taken so many blows that he can't think clearly anymore. Then he spins around after hearing someone yelling. It was Kratos announcing that they would finally begin planting the potatoes in the fields. Hartok watches the scene and decides that he never expected anything from him anyway. At that exact moment, the farming squad begins expressing gratitude to Sergi for slicing all the potatoes for them. She, slightly embarrassed, responds that she didn't cut them for their sake. The monocle wearer notices her reaction and questions what kind of expression that is, since it doesn't resemble the face of a great demon general. He also notices the lower-ranking demons weeping over the potato seeds, and questions whether they aren't ashamed of themselves. He concludes they are all fools and internally declares that the greatest mind among the demons will rise to take the demon lord's throne. Meanwhile, Kratos instructs them to keep planting since soon the sprouts will emerge and break through the ground. He further warns that when that happens they should start removing the extra sprouts. Bahal claims he's very skilled at cutting, but the demon lord orders him to stay quiet, and explains that each seed piece can produce 3 to 6 sprouts. Following this explanation, he poses the question of what is preferable, more or fewer sprouts. The demons answer that more would be better, but Kratos corrects them, stating that fewer is actually ideal. They appear bewildered and question why fewer is better, convinced the demon lord must be mistaken. Hartok, witnessing the conversation, becomes frustrated and calls everyone utter fools. Then he urges them to think for a moment because if there are too many sprouts, they will compete with each other for nutrients. In other words, the potato itself will end up with fewer nutrients. Kratos overhears from afar and admits his surprise, asking how Hartok knows that, and whether he has cultivated before. Hartok replies by questioning if they truly need to be taught something so fundamental, explaining that the sprouts and the potato share the same nutrients, which should be obvious. Kratos then asks how many sprouts would be ideal, and Hartok responds that 2 would be the obvious answer. But after thinking further, he concludes that practically speaking, they could assume 1 sprout is best. However, if that single sprout damages the potato's root, it might die. He also proposes that they could create fertile soil artificially, by adding manure and turning the earth to improve airflow. Everyone stands in awe at his explanation as he continues, stating that the soil group won't only benefit the potatoes but also weeds that compete for nutrients, which means those weeds will need to be eliminated. The demon lord simply cannot comprehend what he has just heard, and loudly demands that everyone applaud since they have a true genius in their ranks. All the demons begin shouting, "Genius, genius, genius," and Hartok becomes agitated hearing it as they don't stop praising him for even a moment. For a brief instant, he recalls how his mother always called him foolish, and turns around, overcome with emotion, trying to hide that he is tearing up, not fully understanding why he feels that way. Then Kratos steps forward and calls him wise, declaring that from now on, he will appoint him to lead the farmer troops as their commander. Hartok internally thinks this is absurd since his intellect exists to conquer and annihilate other species. However, Kratos yells, asking what everyone is standing around for, insisting they show respect to the supreme elite of the demon kind. All at once, they begin shouting that the general is the elite among elites, and Hartok, seething inside, considers everyone beneath him, but with authority, he orders them to follow him from this moment onward, imagining he will command only briefly since those in front of him continue celebrating endlessly about the new leadership. At that point, a system notification appears stating that Kratos has won the psychological battle. He feels confused by this since he has no idea what it refers to. Another notice informs him that he recognized Bahal's neglected childhood and transformed him into a loyal subordinate. He questions internally if he really did this unconsciously. There's also a notification mentioning that Azurat, who had never had a friend, has gained a new companion and thus lessened his violent nature. Kratos doesn't quite understand which friend it's referring to. Meanwhile, Sergi's heart softened. She was a woman who had never experienced love. He also established trust in Hartok, who merely desired acknowledgement. Because of these developments, he now has access to a new skill by using 200 happiness points, and the skill revealed is blood vision. He feels shocked because this ability wasn't in the game at all, and is probably original, just like the Farmer's Throne skill. The system explains that this ability allows him to glimpse the near future of his target, currently up to 6 hours ahead. It also specifies that the target can be a living being or an object. But his surprise intensifies immediately after. A new notification says it can even be used on the sky. This revelation excites him immensely since it's essentially a weather forecast. Meanwhile, somewhere between the forsaken lands of the demons and the human territories, specifically in the village of exiles, a man arrives announcing that he has completely recovered. His subordinate greets him warmly, expressing relief to see him well again. Rivage thanks him for all the support and admits he wishes he could be reborn with a sturdier body next time. Diol chuckles and responds that he'd rather be rich like a noble so he could boss people around. Rivage laughs at that and turns to Kim Chi, telling him they plan to return to the kingdom and asks if he wants to join them. With a serious look, Kim Chi replies that he's unsure, since, as he mentioned before, he doesn't remember his true identity and hasn't lived among humans. Because when he first arrived in that village, the inhabitants didn't exactly welcome him warmly. For that reason he wonders if someone like him would truly be accepted anywhere. The two observe quietly for a moment until Rivage proposes that perhaps he should start by wearing different attire. However, this doesn't happen when Diol teasingly asks if the hero really doesn't want to take off those strange clothes. The messenger concludes that Kim Chi must truly be fond of them. Yet, in his mind, the hero admits that he actually wants to change clothes. But he cannot figure out why they simply won't come off, as if they are fused to his body. Rivage thanks one of the villagers for their hospitality and remarks that living there solely because one is a descendant of an exile is extremely harsh. He adds that when he returns to the kingdom, he will inform the king about this situation. Kim Chi watches this exchange and imagines that Rivage is a nobleman sent to explore the territories near the demons under royal orders. And he is indeed not an arrogant person but rather kind and worthy of respect. This reflection makes him ponder who he himself used to be and concludes that all he remembers is following orders and eliminating others repeatedly. Thinking about this causes him to lower his head, as he wonders if he is even capable of doing anything besides taking lives. Back in the demon realm, the farming squad starts to notice the sprouts emerging and cheers excitedly since they are finally appearing. The generals approach to witness it too, realizing that the plants are truly growing. Flute rushes over to Azurat to share the exciting news. He erupts in anger upon hearing it and demands to know what he's supposed to do with that information. Then, the Kratos calls for the agricultural division and announces that the next phase will be burying, asking the wise Hartok to elaborate further. Hartok explains that burying means covering the sprout stems with earth to prevent the young potatoes from being exposed to sunlight, because if that happens they will change color, lose flavor, and even become toxic, thus becoming what are called spoiled potatoes. Kratos requests applause since the explanation was so insightful, which leaves the general slightly embarrassed. He then gazes upward to examine the weather that day and reflects that he ended up spending 200 happiness points on the weather prediction ability, and his blood vision skill has already evolved, with the activation condition requiring him to stare for 200 seconds without blinking. However, he starts making an expression like a stray dog since his eyes begin burning and it becomes exhausting. The lower-ranking demons witness this and believe that the Demon King is shedding tears of joy because the sprouts have grown. After some time, the ability finally activates, revealing that for the next 6 hours, the weather is expected to stay mostly clear and dry, suggesting that it might be wise to put away the humidifier. Kratos finds this intriguing and tells T-Bone that he will be able to rest peacefully since there won't be that ridiculous windstorm. At that moment, Zephyrus approaches and mentions he has an urgent report to deliver, explaining that the subordinate of the second Star Master has returned. They then head back to the castle and soon after LaFleur introduces himself, stating he received the message about pausing agricultural activities and reports that the third Star Master, Ruster, launched an assault on them, claiming that the Demon Lord had grown weak and that he should seize his position. The Kratos becomes irritated because he thinks all demons behave the same. Zephyrus remarks that this truly poses a problem because if the third Star Master defeats the second Star Master and they ally, it will not be easy to handle them. Kratos agrees and points out that although they are low in level, their numbers are overwhelmingly large. He contemplates that he must find a solution before the second Star Master collapses, even though he cannot neglect the agricultural tasks for too long. The region attacked by the third Star Master is a deep underground abyss known as the Swamp of Decay, which, when compared to the game map, is actually 10 times larger and absurdly distant. He heads to the opposite abandoned area, which should provide bonuses in the game and is located inside the Demon Lord's castle, but it isn't functioning. This makes him ponder how to resolve this and manage the farming at the same time. He pauses to think, not fully understanding why he is so concerned, and with a wicked grin, decides that since he is the Demon King, the boss doesn't have to do everything himself. So he sticks to his plan and Sergi makes a fuss, claiming she isn't fighting because of him. Bahal proudly announces he will follow orders no matter what. The Kratos concludes that he can dispatch 2 of his 4 generals to the battlefield, and along with some powerful demons, they can make a significant impact. He knows that in the boss's domain, the shortcut system is fully connected, including one that leads directly to the Swamp of Decay. Aware of this, he orders the long-range sprayer to be launched, believing that if he and Hartok fully concentrate on the fights, everything will succeed. The Second Kingdom is engulfed in flames and Planus, the second Star Master, is kneeling on the ground and confronts the enemy, demanding how he dares challenge the Demon King and commit treason. The demon approaches and declares that this is a revolt, saying he had no other choice. This is Ruster, the third Star Master. He claims that ending that war will only bring devastation to their race. Planus becomes even more infuriated and argues that the Demon King promised to provide fertile lands, so they no longer need to battle humans for sustenance. Ruster responds that this is not the issue, and with his weapon lifted, he states that fighting with bravery is the pride of their kind. Suddenly, a weapon flies toward them and strikes the Star Master's club directly, knocking it away. He turns to see what caused it and realizes it is 2 of the Celestial Generals. Sergi wastes no time and admits to Ruster that he is correct, as their race truly was born to battle. She says they adore fighting more than anything else but wonders how things ended up like this and why they even started enjoying it in the first place, but she finally understands after observing everything that happened lately. Flute runs with a bright smile on her face. She bursts through her house door, shouting and calling her father to hurry to the fields. Once they return to the field, they are amazed to see the beautiful crops that have grown. Witnessing this brings tears to the lower demons and even Azurat, who also weeps because of it. Hartok and Zephyros watch from afar, as does Kratos, standing proudly before his grand accomplishment. The little girl runs, calling for the Demon King, and Happy says that it is truly beautiful and that she has never seen anything like it before. Kratos simply remains quiet. Back with Sergi, she charges fiercely at the demonic master and attacks with her countless swords. The opponent, distracted, fails to notice the tyrant closing in and gets grabbed. She seizes the chance and unleashes an endless barrage of strikes while her target is restrained. Ruster starts begging her to stop and insists he never mentioned finishing anyone off, claiming he was there to save lives and doesn't understand what they are doing. She reflects that this might be true, but she doesn't stop attacking, declaring that sometimes one must be eliminated to protect many others. He becomes enraged hearing this since it makes no sense to him. Meanwhile, Kratos, in front of Flute, remarks that finally they started to sprout and that there were many at once, then orders the useless flowers to be cut immediately. The demons are upset about this, and Azurat starts yelling, declaring he will never forgive the Demon King for being so heartless. Hartok enjoys hearing this since even in that situation, the king stayed true to his nature. Because of that, he asks what everyone is waiting for since they must carry out the order at once. Dirok, though upset, kneels in front of the flower and sees it looking sad. Another demon laments, saying he cannot do it because they put in so much effort to make them grow and had never seen anything so beautiful on that land. The general, with little patience, warns that if they leave the flowers there, they will consume all the nutrients instead of the potatoes doing so, and the priority is to make the potatoes grow large and well-fed, not create a flower bed. The farming troops then comply even though it pains them deeply. Kratos watches this with excitement since he enjoyed hearing the word potato echo in his mind. After that, the generals return and report that they have captured Ruster. The Demon King makes it clear that this is the consequence for sparking a rebellion and that everything he built was destroyed by another, and he will do something about it. The Star Master simply asks to finish him already since a demon who lost his honor in combat deserves nothing but death. Without delay, Kratos uses his ability to fry the demonic master, but he laughs as he didn't even feel a tickle because he wears excellent armor. Kratos questions if that really happened and if he didn't take any damage at all. Then he drags him to the plantation and uses a lightning rod, explaining that he actually found the task quite useful. Then he uses his ability again, making Ruster scream in agony and also beg to be finished already, and since now they have a new lightning rod. The Demon King requests someone to take Azurat off the cross since he isn't recovering well and it's long overdue to retire him. They untie him and Flute runs toward him to help, but stops midway because his expression was terrifying. The general keeps muttering that the little demon girl humiliated him for too long and that's why he wants to devour her first. She freezes in shock upon seeing his ominous aura. However, his legs give out and he collapses face first to the ground. He curses it all since it has been ages since he last walked until Bahal approaches and lifts him into his arms, leaving Azurat inconsolable to the point of demanding what the hell he thinks he's doing since he's not a princess to be carried around like that. The big guy ties him to his back to carry him and says it was an order from the Demon Lord and that he'll stay like that for now. The Prince of Darkness is furious about it, swearing that he will never forget this humiliation. Meanwhile, Kratos watching from a distance admits that he was worried that Lunatic would snap again, but when he used his blood vision skill, he quickly knew the weather would stay the same for 6 hours and so he decided to release him. He points his finger and says that harvest day will come soon so they need to move faster. But deep down he's relaxed since he has a super fast weed cutter that can eliminate the flowers instantly. He also has a professional transporter that makes everything much smoother. He reflects that, in a way, the autumn harvest isn't far off and the food supplies are steadily depleting, and even though demons are used to famine, he can't bear to see how exhausted they'll become. At that moment, someone approaches calling out to him. It was Planus, who introduces himself as the master of the second star and is there to express his gratitude for having been saved. Kratos stands quiet for a moment, and so does the Star Master. Then, he abruptly shifts his expression to rage, leaving Planus bewildered as to why he suddenly turned furious. All Kratos can think about is why that demon showed up empty-handed to offer thanks when he could have at least brought some wine or a few fruits. The Star Master mentions that he is currently gathering some of the third star subordinates and will soon put them to work. All the Demon King can think about is that the potatoes are thriving splendidly, and he wants to harvest them quickly to prepare chunos. He says that what he really wants is to watch the demons eat until they are completely satisfied. Only then does he pause to think about why he started doing this in the first place. While lost in his thoughts, the second Star Master announces that he will prepare the troops and then leaves the field. Kratos watches him depart and considers that this Star Master was among the weakest and least advanced, yet he liked the confidence he carried and his unwavering loyalty to the demon homeland. He also guesses that this demon is technically like a plant, so in the end he might turn out quite valuable. As Planus walks through the field, he feels under his feet that the earth is incredibly rich and brimming with nutrients unlike anything he had ever sensed before. After strolling for a while, he imagines that at first he was merely a sprout and therefore never grew properly using nutrients. But he finds that soil remarkably different because it was nurtured by Lord Kratos. He uses his power and begins to root himself into the mountain, concluding that he can become stronger in that ground to the extent of potentially rising to the level of Demon King. Thinking about this, his roots start spreading throughout the entire land. The next day, Kratos shouts at the low demons to prepare for exercise time. Starting with arm movements, the Demon Lord guides them with bizarre music. The low demons sing along with him, copying every single demonstration. Kratos, watching T-Bone enjoying the exercises, thinks about how messy the crew was at the beginning and feels amazed by how precise they are now. Thanks to their demonic physical properties, they can follow even the most surprising instructions. While they roll from side to side, Kratos realizes that the low demons will become essentially strong under his command. Suddenly, Bahal arrives, shouting loudly while carrying Azurat on his back. He announced that all the potato leaves had turned yellow, immediately catching Kratos' attention. Everyone hurried to the field and quickly noticed the obvious change in the color of the potato foliage. Zephyros sighed heavily at the sight and questioned aloud if it would truly be impossible to produce anything now. Sergi grew visibly disheartened witnessing the scene. Hartok, on the other hand, found himself completely puzzled, unable to comprehend what had gone wrong. He speculated whether it might have been due to the absence of wind or perhaps even a shortage of water. This left him feeling frustrated and betrayed by his own expectations, causing him to angrily question why on earth he had pinned his hopes on something that now seemed nothing more than a foolish delusion. Just then, the brother stepped forward, approaching the generals and making his way over to the potatoes. He knelt down, grabbed one sprout and carefully pulled out a potato. This action startled the monocled general, who immediately noticed that while the potatoes appeared slightly pale, they were still impressively large, even 2 or 3 times the size of the first potato they had planted. Kratos broke into a satisfied grin and pointed out that they were overlooking the real success. The potatoes had effectively done their job. By absorbing all the nutrients from the leaves, they had grown larger and, as a result, likely tastier. He declared proudly that everyone had performed exceptionally well and emphasized that this achievement had only been possible thanks to their collective effort. Hearing this, all the generals became deeply moved, realizing that their hard work had not been in vain after all. Later that night, back at the castle, Kratos lay in bed reflecting on the praise he had given to the demons earlier. This moment of appreciation stirred up memories from his past life, when he had once planted a tomato plant and his grandmother had complimented him, saying the tomatoes were thriving because of his care. The next memory that haunted him was seeing her being taken into an ambulance, and all he could do was scream helplessly as he watched her being intubated. After dwelling on these thoughts for a while, he rolled over and began to criticize himself, thinking that such sentimental feelings were pointless. As the Demon King, someone meant to embody coldness and authority, he believed he shouldn't allow himself to feel emotions like that. He also reminded himself that even though they would soon have hundreds of potatoes to eat, they could not afford to let their guard down. Relying too heavily on potatoes could lead them straight into starvation if something happened, like a pest infestation, similar to the infamous Irish famine. In other words, he understood clearly that while potatoes would solve the immediate crisis, they would eventually need to plant a variety of other seeds to ensure future survival. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the ground, prompting him to leap up and demand to know what was happening and if there was any issue within the castle. At that exact moment, a massive crack split open, and a gigantic root erupted from below, smashing everything in its path and shooting up to a towering height before him. Kratos stood there, stunned and horrified, shouting in disbelief, questioning what on earth that monstrous thing was. Meanwhile, outside in the fields, Flute was still carefully examining the potato leaves. She recalled that the Demon King had mentioned that the leaves would naturally fall off as the potatoes matured. However, she sensed something felt terribly off and began to dig with determination, convinced that something was wrong beneath the surface. When she finally pulled one of the potatoes out, she was horrified to discover that the vegetable had simply vanished. She prepares to dash off, intending to alert the adults immediately, but soon freezes in place as the entire castle becomes engulfed by countless enormous branches. Kratos finds himself ensnared by the massive tendrils, and just then the Star Master emerges, laughing mockingly and remarking that the Demon King now resembles a helpless insect. Kratos cannot comprehend what he's seeing since that towering figure is actually Planus, the very one who had assisted them only moments earlier. Planus reveals, boasting proudly, that thanks to the nutrient-rich, fertile earth Kratos had cultivated, he was able to grow into this monstrous form. It is only then that Kratos pieces everything together and realizes in horror what must have happened to his precious crops, his rage boiling over as he roars, calling Planus a bastard and demanding to know exactly what he had done to the fields. The Star Master taunts him, asking sarcastically if he's furious and what exactly he plans to do about it. Without warning, Planus violently swings Kratos back and forth before hurling him forcefully to the ground, causing severe injuries instantly. Meanwhile, the generals scramble frantically around the castle, struggling to make sense of the chaos, while Bahal pleads to be freed so he can rush to rescue the Demon King. Sergi and Azurat question if he's lost his mind, pointing out that even if they attempted something, facing that star demon would be impossible. Yet, Bahal remains defiant, asserting that indeed the Demon Lord is weak, a truth he discovered when he himself was aided by Kratos, proving how fragile the king truly is. The devastation within the castle continues without pause, until Planus, having absorbed all the nutrients from the earth, assumes a gargantuan form. At that moment, Kratos plummets helplessly from the immense height. The generals gaze upward in disbelief, and Zephyros is left aghast, questioning if that towering creature is truly Planus. Planus commands all to listen and with a chilling voice, declares that Kratos is dead. All the generals are left in utter shock, unable to process it, and the loyal servants and the baby dragon share the same disbelief. The lower demons are overcome with grief, especially Flute, who breaks down sobbing uncontrollably. Planus continues his proclamation, reminding them of the ancient demon law that dictates power belongs solely to the strongest. For that reason he officially declares himself the new demon king and orders every last one of them to bow before his overwhelming might. Hartok reflects on the unfolding scene, realizing that the Star Master had indeed absorbed all the land's nutrients, and with Kratos incapacitated, he is now unquestionably the strongest. Accepting this brutal truth, he bows, resigning himself to the rule that demons always follow strength above all else. Sergi, filled with frustration, reluctantly bows as well, followed by Bahal and Azurat. Zephyros remains in disbelief, paralyzed by the reality of the situation, while Azurat urges him impatiently, demanding that he show proper respect. Seeing no alternative, finally bows too, and in that moment, everyone submits to the colossal new king, while Zephyros can only cry, mourning the loss of his sovereign. Meanwhile, Kratos finds himself in a different realm, where he hears the voice of his mother from his childhood, calling to him and inviting him to play hide and seek. He senses something odd about that day and wonders aloud if this might be a dream. His mother instructs him to close his eyes tightly, promising to count to 10, and only after that should he begin searching for her. The young boy begins to count, and when he finally reaches 10, he calls out, asking desperately where she is, unable to locate her. In a rising panic, he starts to scream, pleading for his mother to come out, and wonders if counting to 10 again might somehow bring her back. Kratos observed that moment with his head lowered, as his childhood self could do nothing but cry out for his mother, sobbing and insisting that he had finished counting and for that reason, wanted her to appear. Suddenly, a system notification called out to Kratos, urging him to wake up. He eventually forced his eyes open, trying to comprehend what had happened and questioning whether the message had truly addressed him by name. Confused, he asked the notification where it was and if by any chance he had already died. The system instructed him to move, warning that if he did so, he might still survive. He wondered if he could use the glitch technique but quickly realized he couldn't, since there wasn't even enough space to shift his body. However, he noticed that at least one of his hands could still move, so he decided that even if it had to be slow, he would begin digging. Despite the agony, he kept pushing himself, determined not to give up. Meanwhile, outside, Planus called for the scribe to come forward. Zephyros approached and introduced himself formally as the recording secretary. The Star Master then commanded him to record everything accurately, declaring that this was their first grand step and announcing that they would soon begin the invasion of human territories, making it clear that they intended to dominate all humans and raise them like livestock to be consumed. Hartok lamented the situation, remarking that it seemed they had gone back to the beginning. Azurat thought it was actually good news, as at least he would get to fight and slaughter as many as he pleased. Sergi reflected that this was the life demons had always led anyway, and if it meant satisfying his hunger, then so be it. Bahal, on the other hand, didn't think about anything at all. At the same time, all the generals struggled to understand why this new situation left them feeling so uneasy. Meanwhile, Kratos kept trying to crawl out from beneath the debris but felt his breath slipping away as he struggled to breathe properly. Back outside, Planus ordered all the demons to seize their weapons, declaring that it was time to march forward. Zephyros had a thought and warned the new demon king that they couldn't go to war at that moment. Planus didn't appreciate hearing that, and his menacing look caused all the generals to tense up in fear. The secretary tried to clarify that the only food they currently had was a small supply of potatoes, which wouldn't even be enough to feed half the army. Planus dismissed the concern, saying they actually had more than enough food. Then, using his massive branches, he seized Flute, leaving her terrified. Her father began screaming desperately in horror. This immediately caught Azurat's attention. Planus displayed the frightened girl and announced that there were many weak, worthless demons there, ordering that they be used as sustenance. The girl screamed frantically, insisting that it wasn't like that anymore, and that nowadays they could survive without devouring each other. She shrieked louder and louder, reminding everyone that the king had promised them such a future. Planus watched her desperate cries and then dropped her from the towering height. Meanwhile, Kratos, still trapped under the rubble, realized that his heart was stopping. He concluded that if he died now, all the demons would starve. So, he forced his eyes open and activated the bloody strike technique on himself, electrocuting his own body. He decides he cannot allow everyone to starve again, so he resumes digging, screaming with all his might to draw out energy, and with that effort he manages to dig even if only little by little. Outside, Planus is watching as Azurat rescues the little girl, cradling her in his arms. The MC keeps struggling to climb, and whenever his heart threatens to stop, he uses his bloody impact technique to jolt himself awake, but he realizes he's far too exhausted. Then he starts to contemplate whether he still has a long way to go, or if at least he is heading in the right direction, questioning whether his efforts still hold any meaning. Thinking about this weighs him down even more. Outside, all the generals stare wide-eyed, watching Azurat holding the child. Flute is speechless after being saved, and the Star Master asks if he has completely lost his mind. The Blood Prince just keeps staring until he feels the tremor and realizes the massive demon is closing in. Panicked, he tries to cover up by claiming that the little girl is his snack since he had been eyeing her for a long time. However, Planus doesn't buy into this absurd excuse and strikes Azurat harshly with a branch, sending him flying past the generals and leaving him knocked out on the ground. Zephyros laments the scene since he's powerless to intervene. The Star Master once again demands that everyone get ready for battle. Zephyros musters courage and shouts that there's no valid reason to proceed like this. Immediately after saying that, one of the branches lunges at him, but the Tyrant General moves swiftly with his axe and intercepts the strike, making Planus even more enraged. Bahal yells that the Demon King had left a mission for the Secretary, questioning who will count the potatoes if he perishes. The Star Master retorts, asking if they are suggesting a rebellion. Hartok quickly denies it, saying such a thing would be unthinkable, but he stresses that they believe the former Demon King Kratos's plan to invest in farming was a much wiser directive. Sergi requests permission to speak and recalls that the previous Demon King showed them a path where no one needed to die, and because of that, she questions why they should go to war if another solution already exists. Planus loses patience at being defied and begins summoning countless roots while screaming that he is the strongest and therefore, everyone must submit to him. However, they refuse, declaring that true strength comes from what is just, and all the generals ready themselves for combat. The lower demons also shout that the Real King is only Kratos, warning Planus that he will pay for what he did to the fields. Instantly, the roots move toward the demons, but Hartok doesn't allow it, using his mist barrier to block the attacks and protect the farming troop. Bahal places Sergi on his hand and hurls her into the air, giving her the opportunity to slice through all the incoming branches. She then looks directly at the Star Master and yells that she will start by tearing out his eye first. However, he finds this amusing and, besides blocking her attack, also captures the generals with shocking ease. Then he announces that they are all going straight to the canopy for daring to oppose the new Demon King and makes it clear that he is 1,000 times more majestic than the feeble Kratos. While attacking the entire troop, he declares that the former king was nothing but a weakling who perished without even resisting, and because of that, he questions what was so special about that fool since he saw nothing admirable in him. He gets ready to deliver the final strike on Zephyros, who is trying to protect Flute, until suddenly he hears a voice from the MC asking why he's hurting his self-esteem like that. Then Kratos appears, fist clenched, intercepting the attack aimed at his secretary. Next, he smashes the branch into dust in an instant. Planus is stunned to see him alive, unlike Flute, who immediately smiles upon seeing him. The system message appears, stating that Kratos has unlocked a new system and skill at the edge of death, and that concentrated nutrition has been activated. Zephyros and Flute stood frozen, wide-eyed, as Kratos emerged with sudden violence, his crushing blow stunning them both. His bruised and blood-stained knuckles tore deep into the terrain, a brutal signal of his relentless battle to claw his way back. His gaze radiated an intense crimson blaze, forged from the strength of his former self. To grasp this overwhelming energy, one must look back to a time when Kratos was younger, untamed and broken. A frail elder had once asked why he kept speaking as if surrender was his only path. A despondent, youthful Kratos, hunched low and consumed by despair, confessed that existence had become unbearable. Calm but firm, the woman pressed on, questioning if life truly was that unbearable, then why bother surviving at all? Holding a tiny seed gently between her palms, she told him that each of us is a seed. She insisted that all life begins as a seed, forced to fight upward through difficulty to reach the light. With optimism and patience, she claimed one sprouting life would inspire others, and that inspiration would spread. In her serene certainty, she imagined a world reshaped by growth, starting from a single act of resilience. She had promised that all would turn green, conjuring an image of rebirth and flourishing beauty. Kratos, young and raw, rejected what he saw as hollow sentiment, drowning in the weight of his own suffering. Furious, he screamed, questioning why he had been forsaken by his parents, wondering aloud if he was nothing but a failed seed. Tears fell as he vowed he would survive, on his own terms without anyone's help. In a flash of dread, that bold promise shattered as he raced into a hospital room, reality crashing down. With breath caught in his throat, he watched the dying elder, her words echoing like fate's final whisper. She had said that they were all destined seeds, haunting, gentle, and profound words. It was in that moment, as her life faded, that Kratos's true path and inner power began to awaken. Now, with a fierce resurgence in the present, a glowing system prompt appeared, triggered by the immense force of Kratos's awakening blow. Brilliant golden energy radiated outward, signaling the unleashing of his unrestrained power. Kratos took notice. A system called Mana Seed had activated, something unknown, clearly not from the game's usual framework. It presented a third-tier Mana Seed, enhancing his attributes and unlocking a sliver of hope for escape. Then came the unveiling of a rare function, Concentrated Nutrition, an ability allowing all stats to be funneled into a single category, usable once each day. Kratos's eyes lit up, burning with determination. His course was now clear. A baseline boost of 30% to all attributes appeared as the seed took root. A radiant blue nucleus, shaped like a seed, materialized before him, the heart of this new strength. His power now amplified further to 39%, the metamorphosis drawing near. Letting loose a primal roar, Kratos invoked Concentrated Nutrition, directing the totality of his stats into raw physical might. His physical prowess skyrocketed to an incredible 155%, all other stats falling to mere fragments. With explosive force, he erupted from below the surface, his body wrapped in dirt, a walking embodiment of brute strength. Planus recoiled, visibly staggered by the crushing weight behind Kratos's punch. The towering foe stumbled, disoriented by the sudden reversal of momentum. The earth itself groaned and cracked beneath Kratos's return, unable to withstand the magnitude of his reawakening. From the rubble, a golden-lit arm thrust upward, declaring the return of a forgotten legend. His flowing cape swept the air dramatically, a banner of war revived. Kratos, once demon lord, now reborn, stood unyielding, staring down the immense form of Planus. Still trembling from the impact, Planus demanded answers, voice shaken, asking how Kratos had managed to survive, if it's really him standing tall. Kratos, wounded but intact, responds sarcastically by asking if seeing him isn't clear enough to know that he is in fact himself. Nearby, the demon farmers gazed on with faces lit by both relief and awe, recognizing their true sovereign at last. Kratos now stood before them, restored and resolute, the leader they had long awaited as the farmers erupted into cheers for a harvest yet to come. T-Bone, seeing his father, rushed toward Kratos without hesitation. Seeking solace, the little creature pressed affectionately against Kratos's cheek, drawn by warmth and familiarity. Hartok, though visibly relieved by Kratos's return, concealed a storm of lingering doubts beneath his expression. Sergei, clad in battered armor and stained with defeat, trembled at the thought that Planus might be insurmountable. Even Bahal, wounded yet breathing, questioned whether even a demon lord's strength could match Planus's monstrous force. Planus, however, perceived Kratos's reappearance not as a threat, but as an ideal opportunity to extinguish all resistance. Its glowing eyes radiated murderous intent as it promised the annihilation of Kratos and anyone who dared follow him. Yet Kratos, cradling the young dragon, answered the beast's declaration with a calm, unwavering grin. He would not back down. He spoke with clarity, explaining that despite Planus's sheer magnitude, its movements followed a set rhythm, like a predictable raid boss. Internally, Kratos assured himself, every one of the creature's attacks could be sidestepped. He had seen all of these patterns before. Tactical and methodical. He knew the farmer battalion, who had endured brutal training sessions under his command, were equally prepared. Their bodies had been conditioned to react, trained to dodge even monstrous blows without hesitation. As Planus thundered forward, unleashing a deafening battle cry, Kratos issued the call for formation. His troops assembled without delay. The titanic foot of the enemy came crashing down, aiming to crush them in one strike. Kratos ordered them to shift left, and the squad moved with perfect unity. The ground split violently beneath the place they just stood, but their synchronized movement spared them. He called for them to veer right, and again they executed the maneuver like clockwork. He barked for them to hit the ground as a sweeping limb cut through the air just overhead. Kratos's voice rang out, commanding them to roll and not stop moving as the team ducked and spun through the chaos. He commanded them to fall back, leading a coordinated retreat as Planus's pounding blows tore craters into the battlefield. Explosive and relentless, Planus's might was staggering, but Kratos's core adapted with every strike. He shouted again for them to leap, as an enormous limb shattered the terrain where they'd been moments earlier. The beast howled in exasperation, unable to grasp why none of its punishing blows landed. Kratos's grin widened. He had seen it clearly. Planis's patterns left it exposed during the recovery after each assault. He directed them to rotate formation, preparing his unit to capitalize on that fleeting moment of vulnerability. Together, Kratos and his steadfast farmer legion turned as one, primed for the next phase. He raised a hand and pointed, marking the moment to act with pinpoint precision. Fuming, Planis trembled with suppressed fury, its rage mounting as futility dawned on it. A deep red glow enveloped the beast, and with a deafening cry, it descended into full frenzy. Its enormous form writhed and convulsed, overcome by a wave of destructive mania. Unstable and savage, the creature pounded the earth in a blind fit, toppling all within reach. Kratos muttered with a knowing smile that this was it. Planis had entered its berserker phase just as expected. He bellowed for T-Bone to go, releasing the little dragon into battle. Brave and bubbling with resolve, the tiny dragon inhaled deeply, puffing up its chest with purpose. Focused and icy, it released a torrent of freezing breath, a concentrated blast of frigid air. The frost-laced attack struck Planis directly, clinging to its thick hide and beginning to immobilize its form. Caught off guard, Planis recoiled, its body twitching as the unnatural cold seeped through its enormous limbs. Kratos observed thoughtfully, even with his reinforced strength, brute force alone wouldn't be enough to break through such a massive frame. Yet the creature was still a plant. That simple fact anchored Kratos's calculated approach. The thought sparked a glint in his eyes as his mind unfolded its ruthless scientific logic. Bitter cold, merciless and methodical, would expand Planis's internal structure. The extreme temperature would rupture the beast's fibrous body from the inside out. A smirk crept across Kratos's face. He knew the moment of execution was drawing near. T-Bone swiftly retreated just as the massive entity began to groan under the freezing pressure. A sharp, echoing fracture resounded across the battlefield, the sound of Planis's colossal figure starting to splinter. Its eye widened with dreadful realization, now grasping the brutal ingenuity behind Kratos's plan. The once rampaging beast, burdened by its own towering weight and brittle form, had become its own undoing. Kratos's smile grew colder, savoring the impending ruin. Planis howled in panic, asking what was happening as its insides shredded themselves apart. Surrounded by crumbling chaos, Kratos stood motionless, collected, victorious, as T-Bone fluttered back to him. The little dragon nuzzled against his arm, weary yet triumphant. Kratos gently praised him, acknowledging the effort. Cradling his companion, Kratos stepped forward, preparing to deliver the concluding blow. He crouched low, muscles coiling with power as he readied his final offensive. He growled that this would end now, hurling himself forward with blistering velocity toward the faltering titan. As he closed in, Kratos exposed another botanical vulnerability, one that plagued all tree-like foes. A hollowed, dark knot, the heart of weakness, yawned open across Planis's bark-like chest. That cavity, the very flaw in its otherwise impenetrable surface, marked the end. Summoning the full might of his enhanced power, Kratos reared back his fist. With a primal cry, he drove it into the knot, striking with terrifying force. The impact unleashed a chain reaction. The titanic frame of Planis convulsed and shattered. It broke, splintered, and groaned as its structure buckled from within. Each fragment of its wooden flesh fell like shards of a collapsing tower. Finally, a guttural moan escaped the beast's core, and Planis's massive frame began to cave in, signaling its annihilation. As its form disintegrated further, its essence evaporated into the air, dissolving, scattering. A violent explosion ripped through the landscape as the core burst apart, dispersing corrupted energy in all directions. Onlookers, Kratos's allies, gazed from below in stunned reverence. Their demon lord had triumphed. The final wail of Planis echoed briefly before silence took its place. The great tree's reign ended, or so it seemed. Yet amidst the settling dust and shards, a haunting remnant remained. A piece of its frigid form, suspended in crystalline stillness, pulsed with eerie green light. It refused to dissolve. Refused to fade. Perplexed, Kratos narrowed his gaze, unsure if the monster had truly perished. He watched as the distorted visage of Planis receded, only to sink unsettlingly into the soil. Its root-like appendages slowly disappeared beneath the surface, its presence lingering like a toxin. This wasn't how boss-level enemies were supposed to die. Suddenly, a chilling certainty gripped him. From the tainted ground below, Planis began to reform. Its essence twisted upward, reshaping into something darker, more fearsome. Kratos tried to move, but it was too late. Tangled tendrils of living bark ensnared him. He was bound, immobile. Towering above him stood a newly reborn monstrosity, a twisted, humanoid tree abomination. Across the battlefield, the farmer corps stared in horror, their morale cracking as the nightmare renewed. Planus, now reawakened and grotesque, announced the truth behind its rebirth. It had not fallen, it had fed. Consuming the battlefield's nutrients, it had returned stronger. A cursed seed, that's what it called itself. A cursed seed, nurtured in poisoned earth. And now, bearing the legacy of corrupted might, it declared its new purpose, to drench the world in venomous death. With a menacing promise, the reawakened plant monstrosity lunged forward, intent on annihilating Kratos. Bahalinter seated, swinging a massive axe in defiance. Ancient, thudding, his strike landed with a solid crash against the beast's hide. But the blow had no effect. The grotesque creature remained untouched. Before the warrior could react, Planus retaliated with overwhelming force, sending him hurtling through the air like a broken doll. Sergi emerged, retaliating with a storm of razor-edged blades. Her flurry barely grazed the surface before Planus's unyielding form repelled her offensive. A counterstrike followed instantly, leaving Sergi wounded and crumpled beside Bahal. Witnessing his allies falter, Hartok surged forth, releasing a tremendous retaliatory strike. The blow connected, forcing the towering plant to stagger, pained and furious. Eyes burning with resolve, Azurat drew forth a lethal dagger, prepared for a precise, vital blow. His blade pierced Planus, acting with grim determination. Crying out for bountiful harvest, he prepared to finish the battle with a decisive slash. Though comrades had fallen in the clash, he understood the true menace still loomed. He was the last one facing the abomination alone. Besieged, surrounded by silence, with every companion subdued, he prepared himself for the climactic confrontation. And then, with a swift and stunning motion, Azurat severed the creature's head. Crumbling, eerie, the lifeless head tumbled as an ominous green glow radiated from the decapitated body. The colossus began to break apart, its hulking frame dissolving in slow, glowing disintegration. Sparkling motes scattered as the beast was reduced to dust. At last, every trace of Planus, even its twisted origin, had been obliterated, cleansed completely from the world. A peaceful, radiant shimmer lingered over the battlefield, casting ethereal light upon the victors. The farmer corps and surviving warriors stood still, bathing in the fading glow, their trials ended. Freed from the plant's corruption, the former demon lord spat curses upon Planus's demise. Hartok and comrades, though wounded and wearied, began to recover as the echoes of battle died. Meanwhile, Zephyros pledged to amend the betrayals that had transpired and claimed the victory of the demon lord's army. Hartok proudly proclaimed the triumph of the demon lord's ranks. Kratos watched the cheers, but concern took him. The cheers drowned the moment. The farmer corps roared with joy, hailing the victory and their fearless leader. Kratos stood at the center, basking in the adoration of his steadfast legion. Kratos screamed loud for them to stop, desperation climbing in his tone. His crimson gaze flickered, filled with unwavering intensity. Before him stretched a field of ruined, lifeless bodies, scorched remnants and shattered earth. He stared in silence, absorbing the devastation, the quiet cost of their conquest. Even a single fallen leaf bore witness to the catastrophe. He dropped to his knees, the weight of their loss crashing down. Their crops, their people, they would face famine again. Could he demand more suffering from them? No. He couldn't let that cycle repeat. His closest allies gathered around him, their silent presence echoing his sorrow. Then, sudden and radiant, a glowing sphere emerged above him. Mysterious and pulsing, it hovered precisely over a solitary, lifeless leaf. Slowly the orb descended, merging with the brittle husk. Hopeful, unexpected, a miracle revealed itself. And then the dead leaf shimmered. It pulsed once, vivid, alive, renewed by unseen power. Zephyros observed Kratos, whose drooped posture betrayed a storm of frustration, and an unexpected wave of empathy stirred within him, not only for the present moment but for a memory rooted deep in his past. That recollection carried him to a dank prison cell where frightened demons cowered in silence. Among them, one muttered cynically about the new demon lord, dismissing any significance it might bring. To him, their fate as livestock was unchangeable, mere fodder under any rule. Then came the sound of rusted hinges creaking open. A green-skinned demon stepped inside. Panic surged through the cell like wildfire. Most recoiled into corners, trembling. All except one. Young Zephyros remained seated, his expression void of emotion. The green intruder, puzzled by this apathy, approached. Without hesitation, it seized him by the collar like one might handle poultry. Still, the boy's demeanor remained unchanged. Just as the creature drew its blade, an explosion of motion ended its advance. Kratos had arrived, silent, lethal, and filled with fury. In an instant, the green demon's skull was pulverized, collapsing like overripe fruit under pressure. In the aftermath, Kratos questioned the boy's lack of fear. Zephyros responded with startling calmness. He confessed that fear had long left him, and perhaps death would be more merciful than an existence spent in dread. Their struggles felt meaningless, just cattle awaiting slaughter. There was no use in delaying the inevitable. That blunt honesty struck a chord within Kratos. With a rare smirk, he recognized something familiar in the boy's bleak clarity and extended an invitation. From that moment, Zephyros became the demon record keeper. That day, Kratos made a vow to break the cycle of internal predation that plagued their kind. In the present, Zephyros now witnessed a once revered demon lord, one not defeated by force but by the weight of remorse. Rather than speak, he simply moved. Without a word, he grabbed a hoe and began tilling the earth. This subtle defiance caught Hartox's attention. He understood. Orders rang out. The field transformed into action. No war cries, no blades, just hands and tools. The demons, hardened from countless battles, responded to a different call now, one of soil, sweat, and solidarity. Their chants became rhythmic, echoing their new resolve. They sang of plowing through hardship, of oxen moving slow but steady, and of calloused hands pushing through resistance. Kratos, watching in silence, slowly grasped their intent. They had not been broken, they were ready. His eyes sparked with realization. Assignments were given with purpose. One unit would seek out every viable potato. Others prepared tools, sliced seed potatoes, aligned rows, raised soil beds. Zephyros would ensure the blades remained spotless. Hartox would take command of the front effort. Agerat was sent to gather all equipment. Kratos, filled with renewed conviction, raised a clenched fist. Their unified response echoed, a declaration of purpose, of harvest. Among them, Baal charged like a beast of burden, rope clenched between teeth, dragging a plow with raw, unfiltered strength. The image struck Kratos deeply. In that instant, the act of farming revealed itself not as mere cultivation, but war. Against drought, against blight, against failure. Elsewhere, Flute discovered a tiny sprout. Her expression radiated wonder, as if she had unearthed a priceless gem. Declaring it valuable, she lunged for it. But it wouldn't budge. Still tied to a post like a scarecrow, Raster mumbled suggestions half-heartedly. Just when she nearly gave up, another hand joined hers, Agerat's. Together they heaved. From the stubborn soil emerged an enormous root cluster, a potato so massive it could rival a final boss. In a cruel twist of irony, it landed squarely on Raster's face. Flute beamed with accomplishment, and Kratos turned at the commotion. His expression froze. What lay before him wasn't imagined, it was a real potato. Enormous, healthy, and alive. He was speechless. The soil, once barren, had come alive. The explanation came to him suddenly. After the defeat of Planus, faint sprouts had begun appearing. It all made sense. The walking colossus of a forest had redistributed nutrients into the land through its very collapse. Without hesitation, Kratos ordered a full excavation. The farmland burst into activity. Reports of colossal tubers echoed from all sides. A farmer lifted one that nearly needed transport clearance. It was undeniable. The soil was overflowing with bounty. Cries of discovery rang out. T-Bone, ever relaxed, lounged atop a potato the size of a cart, licking it like a sun-warmed treat. Tough demons, once warriors forged in brutality, now danced in joy, arms full of produce, faces beaming like children in spring. Zephyros, voice shaken with emotion, glanced toward Kratos with a question that needed no answer, asking if this is a bountiful harvest. Kratos held the massive crop in his arms. His gaze softened. The weight was real. His voice, usually stern, carried warmth. Tears welled up, not of sorrow but relief. Around him, laughter broke out, unrestrained and pure. And so it was. Against all odds, with hands once trained for war now sowing hope, they had achieved what once felt impossible. A true, bountiful harvest. A harvest awaited, one where hunger would no longer shadow their lives. Within the newly established demon stronghold, Kratos, bearing the title of Demon King, examined a cluttered assortment of makeshift reports pinned to a worn-out board. His gaze was sharp, expression solemn as he reviewed the current status of the Forsaken regions. The first territory, labeled with a solitary star, Sartl. Its ruling lord had made the mistake of rebelling, an error swiftly met with destruction. Adding to the fortune, once the heart of Frost ceased to pulse, his followers had disappeared like unpaid apprentices on the eve of a festival. The area now lay deserted, an open canvas for any ambitious settler armed with determination and a shovel. Next came the two-star zone, Planis's former domain. The death of its master left his scattered forces in complete disarray. Unsure of their moral compass, they wandered aimlessly, like forgotten side characters abandoned mid-quest. Then there was the third-star domain, Raster. An individual whose most notable legacy involved acting as a literal lightning rod. Oddly enough, perhaps his most meaningful contribution to date. Kratos considered retribution for past disobedience, but it felt akin to blaming a hamster for steering a sinking galleon. The final and most complex, the 4-star territory, was home to a serpentine figure known as Tartu. In the original game framework, Tartu had proven trustworthy, which, within demonic standards, implied he was unlikely to commit betrayal that particular day. Kratos weighed the idea of mobilizing reinforcements from regions 2 and 4. These areas remained relatively stable and responsive. However, expanding forces meant escalating logistical demands, additional supplies, more mouths, and the ever-growing challenge of managing resources, particularly meals. Until the next yield, caution was necessary. Zephyros, known also as Ender Zephyros and now a demon monarch in his own right, provided an update. Mass stew production had commenced under prior instructions. Kratos acknowledged the report with a rare glint of satisfaction and ordered that the food vouchers be organized accordingly. At that moment, a subordinate rushed into the chamber, announcing that standby communications had been dispatched to each territory. This piqued Kratos' attention. Were they complying? A brief hesitation followed. The 4-star district, it appeared, was not responding. Tension flickered in Kratos' expression. Why the disobedience? The messenger, wide-eyed and clearly bewildered, offered no reason. No explanation had been given. With evident restraint unraveling, Kratos leaned forward. The messenger hadn't even asked? And worse, ask whom exactly? The situation frayed further. Kratos, now stretching his wings with irritation like a worn warrior returning reluctantly to the battlefield, struggled to comprehend how basic inquiries had gone unmade. His thoughts spiraled. This was equivalent to dealing with bureaucratic buffoonery, where forms were submitted in crayon and logic abandoned ship. Zephyros, ever the harsh observer and unsparing commentator, noted how Kratos, despite his current air of benevolence, remained wholly and unmistakably a demon king. A visage so hideous that even time itself would struggle to produce anything more grotesque. Kratos, though calm on the surface, recoiled inwardly at the idea that something even worse could one day emerge. Attempting to bring order back into the conversation, Zephyros inquired about the servants. Had they offered any insights? Where was the 4th Lord? The truth landed like a bolt of divine punishment. The 4th Lord had crossed into human territory, amassing bodies for agricultural use. Outwardly, Kratos maintained his composure. Internally, however, he was erupting with alarm. That specific scenario, etched into the game's history, was the trigger. A moment not of balance or challenge but of utter devastation. The ancient paladin, a harbinger of annihilation, would be awakened not by intention, but by invasion. As long as no borders were crossed, the paladin would remain dormant. But with that blunder, the future became a parade of corpses. Fallen generals, himself shattered and impaled, entire regions crumbling beneath divine wrath. His pulse thundered with urgency. Zephyros, noticing his movement, called out. Where was he going? The answer was self-evident. Kratos had already launched forward like an arrow loosed from a desperate bow. Assistance? Unnecessary. Solo was swifter. As he dashed across the lands, his mind raced. The fall of Planis had elevated the mana seed to level 4. Attributes had shifted, agility now at an explosive 160%, while other stats such as stamina, mental resilience, strength, and arcane potency remained at modest 10s. He screamed inwardly, embracing every exploit he knew, shortcut pathways, unintended movement techniques, even bending terrain boundaries if needed. A mental map formed, with precise markers, demon-controlled wastelands bordering the Tower of Life, the sacred grave of the Elder Paladin. His destination clear. His panic justified. His mission urgent. He ran, not to conquer but to prevent annihilation. And further out stood Magrav Fortress, a border stronghold separating demonic realms from human dominion. Perched atop the fortress walls, one sentinel narrowed his eyes and raised a hand to signal. Recognition flickered as a familiar figure approached. Another watchman leaned over the parapet, noting the presence of only a single disheveled attendant and an assortment of odd-looking travelers. Below, the fortified gates creaked open. From within strode Commander Wokos. The report came swiftly. Envoy Azrahan, also known as Javier, returned from the wilds looking worn and hollow-eyed. His explanation was simple. A monstrous horde had begun to stir but hadn't even crossed into demonic territory before retreating. He acknowledged the outcome as yet another failed expedition into enemy lands, just like the rest. The soldiers were permitted to rest. As Javier and his companion Lloyd made their way toward the inner gate, a sudden metallic clash halted their steps. Kimchi stood silent as the mood shifted. Wokos's gaze turned glacial, reminding all present of the rule: only those who had once left could return. Javier's pulse quickened. He attempted to defend the old man's presence, claiming the aged one had rescued him in the lawless zone and posed no danger. Yet Wokos remained unmoved. Before tensions rose further, Lloyd stepped forward, donning his most charming merchant facade, and pulled a glittering bribe from beneath his coat. The gesture backfired catastrophically. With a punishing blow, Wokos struck Lloyd so violently that his future lineage might have felt it across generations. The commander's fury ignited, and his accusation struck deeper than the slap itself. What followed escalated swiftly. The blade that had stopped them now hovered dangerously close to the old man's throat. A demand was issued: the cloak must come off, and if there were even a hint of treachery, death would follow. Javier inwardly panicked. He knew that whatever lay beneath the fabric would bring disaster. H turned his gaze slowly toward Lloyd. The moment stretched, and then something erupted. A pressure flooded the air. Killing intent, thick enough to cut through steel, surged from the cloaked figure. The world seemed to pause. Even Wokos faltered in that instant. A horn sounded. Sirens wailed from every tower. A sentry screamed from above. The enemy was here. Beyond the gates, a nightmare force advanced. Giants of flesh and scale, row upon row of demons, forming a living wave of horror that darkened the land. Orders barked through the wind. Lines of defense scrambled into motion. Among the chaos, the supposed servant stood unmoving. Within his mind, something stirred, a familiar sensation like a buried prompt from an old game. Detection of hostile units, directive to eliminate. Outside the fortress, chaos reigned. Huge logs slammed into the gate with thunderous impact. Archers fired volley after volley from the walls, arrows slicing through the sky. But the enemy struck back with crude ingenuity, stones tied to ropes, flung like siege hammers, smashing barriers and skulls alike. It was less a battle and more a construction site gone mad. The main gate creaked under relentless pressure, wood splintering with each ram's hit. Inside, civilians cowered in corners, eyes wide, breath shallow. The aged instinct screamed to act, centuries of battle reflexes flaring. Past incarnations, all ending in blood, all forced into violence. His hands twitched, yearning for a weapon. If not for Javier's restraining grip, those hands would already be tearing through the enemy. But this time was different. The old warrior scanned the room, families, the elderly, even children, paralyzed with fear. Perhaps now was not the time to flee but to fight. Then the moment broke. A wooden groan echoed louder than before, and the gate collapsed inward with a final, devastating crash. The flood began. Demons surged through the opening, claws, teeth, war cries. At the head marched a serpentine monstrosity, Tartu, weapon raised, issuing his command to raise the defenders and turn their corpses into fertilizer. Commander Wokos's shout split the chaos. He called for the destruction of the rear bridge. A soldier hesitated, stunned. The commander's eyes burned with desperation. Death was inevitable, but the homeland had to be protected. No demon could be allowed to cross. The order flew, and in moments, the rear bridge detonated into a storm of debris and smoke. Any escape was now severed. Javier's complexion turned ashen, lips dry. He could hear the explosion ringing in his skull. The bridge was gone. Lloyd beside him turned a shade paler, nausea clinging to his features like sweat. The grim truth settled: there would be no escape. Among the defenders, one cried out in despair over dreams unfulfilled. Without warning, a cataclysmic blast ruptured the air. A segment of the outer wall shattered next, sending stone and dust cascading into the chaos. Tension turned instantly into bedlam. Shrieks filled the air, bodies scattered in all directions, many stumbling in blind panic. Amid the frenzy, a colossal demon surged from the ranks, its massive hand descending into the sea of people to snatch a young girl. Her shrill cry pierced the air, matched by the agonized scream of her mother. Instinct seized Javier. He sprinted forward, but was immediately halted by a firm grip from Lloyd. Meanwhile, the kimchi remained still, entirely composed. A moment later, the demon's torso simply vanished, erased in an instant as if sliced from existence. The child plummeted from the severed grasp, but Javier broke free, diving through the smoke to catch her midair. He cradled her during the roll, absorbing the impact. Even Lloyd stood stunned, struggling to comprehend what had just unfolded. Above, Kimchi descended, his cloak catching the wind in a silent display. His gaze swept the battlefield until it locked onto Tartu. With no sound but the whisper of fabric, Kimchi landed directly in front of him. There were no theatrics, no glowing runes or swelling music, only a solid thud as his boots met the ground. Tartu's eyes narrowed, puzzled by the Kimchi's attire. The outlandish clothing seemed out of place, almost comical. Kimchi remained unshaken, projecting calm authority as he attempted to de-escalate. Tartu, amused and defiant, dismissed the Kimchi's authority entirely, questioning what he could possibly do in such garb. What followed was silence so tense it pulled the air taut. Kimchi didn't so much as blink before delivering a threat with the cold finality of a closing tomb. The atmosphere shifted like a storm front arriving, weighty, electric. Tartu let out a low snarl, lifted his weapon and lunged. Kimchi didn't budge. His head tilted slightly as though listening to an inner voice. Deep in thought, he questioned whether this confrontation was inevitable. Resolution settled into his bones. There would be no more hesitation. In that instant, his eyes flared with chilling focus. Before Kimchi could react, Kratos delivered a powerful hit, creating a dramatic entry. The decision was made, he would become the blade against his own kind. His foot struck with sudden ferocity, colliding with Tartu's neck. The demon's weapon spiraled away, landing far beyond the skirmish. Kimchi stood impassive, unreadable, as Tartu skidded across the earth like discarded rubble. Not far away, Kratos, the current demon king, watched in mounting panic. Sweat poured down his temples, his thoughts unraveling. This unexpected appearance of his other self had sent his mind into chaos. Breathless and overwhelmed, he felt as though he'd sprinted headlong into a nightmare. His gaze locked onto Kimchi, internal dread rising. Why had this version chosen now, of all times, to appear? Tartu, dazed and battered, turned his gaze toward Kratos. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. He attempted to speak. Kratos answered not with words but with a savage stomp to the face. Rage poured from him as he delivered blow after blow, his fury a physical storm. It wasn't just violence, it was punishment, frustration, desperation. Questions spilled out in angry bursts. Why the insubordination? Why wage war against humanity? Tartu weakly attempted to justify himself, claiming rank, but another crushing strike silenced him. Kratos barely paused, turning only briefly to glance at Kimchi before unleashing another round of furious kicks. Each strike carried not just power but disbelief. They had worked for peace. They had built something stable, quiet lives in hidden fields trying to exist like harmless vermin beneath notice. That was the agreement. No bloodshed. Just survival. And now, because of one reckless act, everything teetered on collapse. Beneath the rage, what truly gripped Kratos was fear. He silently pleaded for leniency. Just this once, just this one mistake, he hoped would not bring ruin. Let the demons live. Then Kimchi finally spoke, breaking the silence with a revelation that froze Kratos in place. Recognition had struck. Kimchi had seen through everything. He knew exactly who stood before him. Kratos's foot halted mid-kick. His entire form stiffened, breath catching in his throat. Knees trembling, sweat running cold, his thoughts spiraled. His identity had been exposed. The worst-case scenario had just arrived. It was at this moment he knew. He fucked up. The reptilian at the front of the warriors stopped, clearly confused, having just heard something far too strange to ignore. He looked back to where aged Kimchi and Kratos were, with the reptilian king lying on the ground. But the distance made it impossible to understand the conversation. Suddenly, Kratos seemed to have made a life-or-death decision. His body leaned forward as if about to attack with full fury. Aged Kimchi kept an impassive expression while Kratos suddenly took a step, then drove his horns into the ground, leaving both reptilians and warriors equally perplexed. Kratos was in a position far from dignified for a demon lord. Upside down, with his claws and horns embedded in the earth and his rear proudly pointed toward the sky. Aged Kimchi watched the scene, unsure whether what made him more uncomfortable was the situation itself or the fact he was staring at Credo's rear. The reptilians tried to process what they were seeing. One noticed the enemy didn't know how to react, while another wondered if this was the Demon Lord's newest and most intimidating threat pose. Aged Kimchi looked at Credos and asked what he was doing. Credos remained in that position, explaining that he was performing a bow, a gesture expressing extreme gratitude or an apology. He stated that, as Demon Lord, he had no intention of invading the human world, and that his subordinate had acted on his own, which was why he came quickly to contain the situation. The hero doubted Credos, questioning if he really thought anyone would believe the words of a demon. Credos began driving his horns into the ground repeatedly, asking to be believed and promising to apologize dozens, even hundreds of times, until his horns were completely worn down. A little farther away, one reptilian thought that act of tearing the ground with his horns was a threatening stance, like that of a bull. Another thought it was exactly what was to be expected from a demon lord. Credos thought about how pathetic and shameful he must look, but knew that if he didn't do it, all demons would die. Sweat ran down his face as he clenched his teeth, determined to act as a responsible leader. He remembered that when he was a child, he once saw a worker kneeling before his superior, with his forehead almost to the ground, begging for forgiveness. The superior, with a cruel smile, mocked him and made it clear it would not end anytime soon, even threatening his reputation. Credos had decided he would endure any humiliation if it meant protecting his people. Back in the present, he kept striking his horns against the ground countless times without stopping, opening holes in the dry earth with each blow. Aged Kimchi watched the scene with a steady gaze, stating that all of it was useless and that he existed to kill him. With a grim expression, Aged Kimchi raised his heart-shaped wand, determined to end Credos right there and then wipe out the remaining demons. However, Credos made no attempt to defend himself. He simply continued slamming his head against the ground with force. That echoed in the hero's mind, that he should kill them all. Until Aged Kimchi stopped, noticing a strange pattern in the Demon Lord. The hero realized that Credos had been hitting his head on the ground exactly 10 times, then making a brief pause and then another 10 strikes. It felt oddly familiar. Then he had a revelation. The Call of Duty bore a resemblance to Credos. While scouring the demon's land, he always did everything in sets of 10. Before stepping into a trap, he would count 10 times. Even when doing some odd, meaningless act, it was always in tens, repeating the pattern as if following an invisible command. Back to Credos. He looked regretful, pleading for mercy with such emphasis that it completely contrasted with the usual demeanor of a demon lord. Aged Kimchi stood there, surprised, keeping still while Credos remained kneeling, head bowed before him. In his thoughts, he questioned why the Call of Duty had presented itself in the form of the Demon Lord. Feeling lost, he told Credos to stop it. Credos lifted his sweaty face toward him, and Aged Kimchi merely muttered for the demon to disappear, warning that he was one step away from losing his patience and killing him right there. To Credos, that threat sounded like a relief, making him smile. Quickly, he picked up the reptilian king of the 4th region and placed him over his shoulder, thanking him in an emotional tone and promising never to forget that gesture for the rest of his life. Then he ordered the other reptilian demons of the 4th army to retreat immediately, shouting for everyone to withdraw quickly. The reptilians were confused by the sudden turn of events, not fully understanding what had just happened, but they followed the demon lord's order without question. Credos led the way, carrying the reptilian king on his shoulder, followed by the other reptilians advancing with swords in hand. Meanwhile, Aged Kimchi remained still amid the cloud of dust raised by their rush. The reptilian king lifted his head, beginning to regain consciousness, and saw Aged Kimchi's back as he stood apart from the group. In a burst of fury, he broke free from Credos and charged with determination toward his target, claws aimed at an enemy who seemed unaware of his presence. Credos tried to stop the attack but failed. Aged Kimchi, with minimal effort, extended his arm to push the opponent, and thanks to his overwhelming strength, that simple gesture was enough to shatter and sever the reptilian king's arms, hurling him violently toward the Rocky Mountains. Credos, standing behind the other reptilians, watched the scene in disbelief, his hand still raised in a motion of attempted intervention. Soon, the heavy, dull sound of the reptilian king's body smashing against the rocky wall echoed, followed by the impact of his arms falling separately to the ground. The king's blood slowly trickled down the mountain as Credos watched, body trembling and sweat dripping down his face. Aged Kimchi's bright blue eyes were fixed intensely on him. Horrified, Credos felt a whirlwind of negative thoughts flood his mind. Aged Kimchi acknowledged that this decision had not come from Credos, but from someone else. Without another word, he tossed his cape back and began to walk away, leaving a clear warning that if Credo so much as showed his horn in the human world again, he was certain he would kill him. Kratos grew tense at those final words and remained still, staring at the hero's silhouette as it grew more distant. The scene shifts back to the wall that separates the village from the surrounding rocky mountains. Ryjev, surprised to see aged Kimchi, asks what happened to him. At his side, Diol expresses concern over the hero's sudden disappearance. Aged Kimchi, wearing a serious and downcast expression, replies that there was a battle. Ryjev, incredulous, asks if he really faced those fearsome demons. Wokos appears from behind and, placing a hand on his chest, acknowledges aged Kimchi's courage, apologizing for any previous disrespect. He mentions how everyone saw the hero defeat the demons with a single blow and make the rest kneel. Aged Kimchi remains silent, unsure what to say, while Ryjev, surprised, confirms the hero's strength but leaves the sentence unfinished. Suddenly, Wokos raises his voice and calls on everyone to cheer for aged Kimchi, the one who protects the fortress. The warriors raise their weapons in celebration, shouting in unison. Despite the acclaim, aged Kimchi keeps a blank expression. At that moment, a message appears stating that this is his life in Zoth, and that he has finally escaped the cycle of repeated massacres. Aged Kimchi tilts his head and eventually reveals that he chose the path of sparing others, even though he killed 2 of them, leaving the warriors wide-eyed in surprise. The scene changes to the abandoned region known as the Fourth Star, a land of storms and desolation. Kratos was running across the dry, cracked ground, with an army of reptilians following at a distance. Already impatient, he thought they had finally arrived, mentally complaining about how slow it was to drag such a large group along. Stopping, he turned, clenched his fists, and ordered the reptilians to return to their castles or homes, warning them that if they invaded the human realm again, he would kill them himself. One of the reptilians stammered, explaining that they only acted that way because they had received orders from Lord Tarthu. Kratos, with no patience for excuses, replied that he didn't want to hear justifications and ordered them to go home immediately. He continued walking, his footsteps echoing over the hardened earth. In his thoughts, Kratos reflected that he was following the path set by the game, where there was no room for mistakes or shortcuts, which made everything take even longer. He knew he needed to hurry to tend to the great potato harvest. Kratos then came across a well in the middle of that abandoned place and thought that, if it still worked, traveling wouldn't be such a big problem anymore. He approached the well, looked inside, and recognized that it contained the system that controlled power-ups and teleportation. He had already tested several of them before, but none had worked. Kneeling down, he placed his arms inside the well and wished to teleport, but believed it wouldn't happen because he wasn't a paladin. Suddenly, a blue light began to illuminate the well, surprising Kratos. A blue screen appeared, informing him that because of his encounter with a paladin, a new game system had been unlocked. The teleportation function through abandoned wells was now available. Kratos' body was sucked into the well, initiating teleportation. Then, another blue screen appeared, stating that all the wells he had visited since arriving in this world had been activated, and asking where he would like to go. During the journey he thought about going to the Demon Lord's castle underground, but wondered if the location was still intact. The screen confirmed that the well remained intact. Kratos confirmed his choice, and the screen indicated that he was being transported to the underground of the Demon Lord's castle. His body continued to be propelled by the intense teleportation energy, wrapped in a blue blur that dragged him at high speed through the unknown space. Azurat and Flute were in the underground of the Demon Lord's castle. Azurat was holding a broken piece of wood in his hand, frustrated over yet another useless tool. Flute, kneeling beside a pile of small stones, was carefully removing the debris, hoping to find at least one farming tool that still worked. In the middle of the hole Flute was digging, a sudden intense blue glow appeared, leaving her confused. Suddenly, the face of the Demon Lord emerged in the middle of that blue light, wearing an expression of pure dread. Kratos' body burst out of the hole with a thunderous roar, sending rocks and dust flying in all directions. Flute's eyes went so wide in shock it seemed they might pop right out of her head. The scare was so great that she simply collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Azurat turned toward the noise, desperation on his face as he tried to understand what had just happened. Flute lay sprawled on the floor, fainted, right in front of Kratos. He, in turn, tilted his head back, fighting against an intense wave of nausea, his hands pressed firmly over his mouth, trying to hold back what seemed on the verge of escaping. Kratos couldn't contain it. Suddenly, a powerful stream erupted from his mouth, forming a vibrant rainbow. Realizing what was about to happen, Azurat rushed toward Flute. In a desperate move, he threw himself in front of her just in time. Credo's rainbow-shaped vomit sprayed forcefully, landing squarely on Azurat's back. Flute, who had been unconscious on the ground, woke up in shock. Credo sat at the edge of the well, wiping his mouth with a tired motion, his stomach churning, mentally grumbling about the lack of delicacy in the teleportation. He wondered if they couldn't just transport him more smoothly the way it would happen in a game. In front of him, Azurat lay sprawled on the floor, covered in that colorful vomit, while Flute scrambled frantically to help her friend. Flute tried to hold back the tears welling in her eyes as she looked at Azurat lying there. Ignoring the entire scene before him, a smile spread across Credo's face. He reflected that, considering he'd managed to get here with only one bout of vomiting, it was actually a good cost-benefit ratio. Without wasting time, he was already preparing to get started on whatever came next. Credos rose gloriously, fists clenched, an eager smile on his face, already full of determination to begin mass production of giant potatoes. Meanwhile, Flute wailed in despair, crying over Azurat, who still lay unconscious on the floor. In the storage area, Credos stood beside Zephyros, admiring the massive pile of giant potatoes, thinking that no matter how many times he saw it, he was always impressed. Zephyros reported that the mist created by Hartok had already been completed. Credos remained silent for a moment, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the potato pile. Then he leaned down, picked one up, and immediately felt that something seemed off, an inexplicable discomfort at the touch of the potato. He froze for a moment, gripping it tightly, his gaze locked on it with intensity. Frustration spread across his face as though something was terribly wrong. Credos climbed onto the pile, picking up each potato to examine before tossing it aside. His sharp gaze searched for something amiss, any detail out of place that could justify his frustration. Zephyros watched with curiosity and asked if there was a problem with the potatoes. Among the pile, Credos clenched his teeth, glared at one in his hands, and declared that the giant potatoes had no sprouts. Zephyros asked if the absence of sprouts meant the potatoes wouldn't grow. Credos, teeth clenched and eyes shut in disbelief, confirmed that these potatoes were sterile. In the Demon Lord's temporary castle, Credos sat in a makeshift wooden chair serving as a throne. Beside him, Zephyros stood, while the 4 demon generals waited before him. Resting his head on his fist, frustrated, Credos explained that even if they planted those giant potatoes, not a single one would sprout. Hartok explained that the potatoes had been unnaturally genetically altered and, as a result, had lost their ability to reproduce, becoming mutants. Baal lamented, asking if that meant they couldn't eat them. Beside him, Sergi turned and replied impatiently that eating them wasn't the problem. The real issue was that they couldn't be planted. Once they ate everything they had now, that would be the end. Still disheartened, Credos remarked that he had never planned to rely on potatoes forever. They were vulnerable to disease and once infected, the entire crop would be lost. Azurat observed that sooner or later they would have to plant something else. Then, with irony, he questioned what else could possibly exist in that land besides potatoes. Credos answered bluntly that there was simply nothing else. The Demon Lord went on, revealing, however, that he knew of a place full of seeds for planting. Zephyros, upon hearing this, grew thoughtful, wondering if Credos was referring to what he suspected. A land full of crops. Credos finally revealed that it was the land of humans, and the general stood still, staring at him intently. Baal burst out in excitement, imagining invasion, plunder, and another full-scale war, while Sergi, irritated, shouted back at him, trying to get him to calm down and contain his enthusiasm. Then, more serious, Sergi turned to Credos and noted his dejection, recognizing that no one hated war more than the Demon Lord himself. Credos began giving orders to each of them. He instructed Zephyros to immediately begin construction of the giant Chuno and ordered him to remain there to assist Hartok's team of farmers, helping to manage them. Then, turning to Sergi, Baal, and Azurat, his expression shifted completely, now terrifyingly eager, as he announced that they would go to the human lands, sell the Chuno, and use the money to buy seeds. He remembered the problem that was aged kimchi and thought that as long as they didn't run into him, everything would be fine, and even if they did, he already had a plan ready. Credos already had a contingency prepared should his plan fail. His commanders stood frozen, unable to process the sheer boldness of what he proposed. Zephyros, in particular, believed that Credos had completely lost his sanity and questioned why such absurdity was even being considered. Pointing toward the 3 generals selected for the mission, he highlighted the glaring weakness in the strategy. He remarked on Bahal, emphasizing how monstrous his appearance would seem from the perspective of any human. His assessment continued with the hooded Azurat, whom he described as a walking omen of disaster, resembling a serial killer with unnatural skin. Finally, his scrutiny landed on Sergei, whose armored frame and pallid complexion gave him the appearance of a frostbitten human-octopus hybrid plagued by illness. In Zephyros's view, no human would hesitate to brand them as demons and attack without warning. The blunt words sparked outrage. Azurat and Sergei seized the advisor with fury, though he defended himself by claiming he had spoken only the truth. Azurat's temper flared, making it clear that silencing him permanently would be an entirely reasonable course of action. Bahal interjected, insisting that Zephyros's assessment was accurate, claiming he alone looked normal among them. Azurat, however, was quick to counter, declaring that his fiery hair made him resemble a demon more than any of them. The hooded figure scoffed at Hartok's lack of self-awareness, labeling him as nothing more than a corpse-like husk compared to his own supposed elegance. Sergei, amused by the chaos, remarked that they all resembled boiled fish. This sparked an eruption of insults, with the others turning on him, mockingly reminding him that he was the one likened to a sickly octopus. The quarrel escalated rapidly, devolving into an undignified brawl across the floor. Kratos observed the disorder with his chin resting on his hand, silently reflecting on their fragile egos and how pitiful their squabbling truly seemed. A simple gesture from his raised hand was enough to bring the chaos to a halt. Attempting to ease the tension, Kratos offered a mocking remark about their lack of attractiveness, implying none of them were worth showing off in the first place. The room fell into dead silence at the jab, but Kratos considered the awkward stillness a victory, since it restored order. Turning his attention back to the matter at hand, he asked Zephyros about the supplies taken from the hidden passage in Saruthal's castle. The advisor confirmed, producing a red cloth that concealed a cluster of small writhing blue creatures. The beings, known as Kekyu, wiggled and squeaked with an odd, almost endearing charm. When one of the blobs leapt forward with a squeal, Sergei stared in bewilderment, unsure of what he was looking at. Kratos revealed the truth with a wide grin. They were living elixirs of metamorphosis, meant to be consumed in order to transform into non-demonic forms. The commanders stared at the slimy creatures in shock as Kratos declared that this would be their method of infiltration into human lands. Disgust rippled through the group, some horrified at the suggestion of consuming them. Kratos, dripping with sarcasm, retorted that they surely had not expected the blobs to be applied like ointment. Bahal, far less concerned, bellowed that he had no issue with strange food. Without hesitation, he seized one of the squirming elixirs and shoved it into his mouth. A loud crunch echoed as he chewed, while the others watched in disbelief. He roared in outrage at the foul taste, leaving another to wonder aloud if he had truly expected something so grotesque to be palatable. The sight left the room in stunned silence, the tension now mixed with sheer disbelief. Without warning, Bahal began to radiate a dazzling golden light, while the others observed in astonishment. Kratos noted that the outcome of the metamorphosis depended entirely on the user's personality, silently hoping that none of them would emerge too feral. From his vantage point behind a stone pillar, Kratos watched as the glow intensified, flooding the area with blinding brilliance. When the light finally weakened, a new outline appeared within the dispersing smoke, accompanied by a hesitant voice announcing the change. In a sudden burst, Bahal's body reshaped into that of a striking, well-built man with flowing crimson hair, adopting a shy, almost awkward pose. Kratos understood then that the elixir of metamorphosis drew upon one's innermost wishes, realizing that this refined form represented Baal's true self. Obeying the decree of their demon lord, Sergei struck at one of the blue elixirs, giving rise to speculation that her hidden desire might have been beauty itself. Kephiros produced a mirror to reflect the result, revealing Sergei transformed into a fluffy azure alpaca with long eyelashes. The transformed creature shrieked its new identity while a caption revealed the truth. Sergei, the cold sovereign, had secretly yearned to embody the warmth of a gentle spirit. Impatience surged through Azurat, who seized the hooded demon's face and forced the elixir down. Moments later, a massive, gray pelican-shaped beast with crimson eyes emerged from swirling clouds, its screech echoing across the skies. The caption revealed this form as Azurat, the blood-drinking prince, whose deepest desire was the freedom of endless years. Kratos then declared himself next, biting down on a blue elixir. Within the veil of transformation smoke, a shadowy figure took shape before finally clearing, unveiling a pale man with long hair, carrying the air of a bitter graduate student. The transformation was underwhelming, and Kratos worried inwardly that it lacked impact. In the mirror's reflection, the change seemed almost trivial, drawing uncertain stares from the alpaca Sergei and pelican Azurat. He remarked mockingly to himself that he appeared no more than someone with failing health, then issued the order for the expedition team to depart. Thus began their strange march across the desert, Kratos, Baal in his new form, an alpaca and a pelican. A sudden chime resounded as a glowing system window materialized before Kratos, startling him. The notification warned that receiving damage or activating abilities would revert them to their original demon bodies, forcing the party to proceed with caution. Their plan required using an abandoned well as a teleportation anchor. By joining hands they activated the warp and were pulled through together. Upon arrival, Kratos clutched his stomach uneasily, while the others struggled with the disorienting side effects, rainbow-colored vomit marking their discomfort. Raising his gaze to a distant fortress, Kratos pondered how they might gain entry past its fortified gates. His thoughts turned to the hero-aged Kimchi, suspecting that the man had likely already advanced deeper into human territory. Enough time had passed, he reasoned, for the hero to have moved on, and the disguise from the elixir should be enough to prevent recognition regardless. Even so, sweat beaded on his brow as his hand gripped at his throat in nervous anticipation. Meanwhile, from the fortress walls, a scroll was unfurled as a lookout cried out about the approach of a suspicious group. Guards speculated whether demons were near, though one dismissed the idea, claiming the newcomers did not resemble such beings. Another muttered that the strangers merely appeared sickly. From the gate stepped a man clad in blue armor, his short white hair and pointed goatee giving him a severe presence. He planted himself firmly before the travelers, barring their path. Identifying them as exiles, he ordered their immediate retreat, denying them passage. Within the mind of the alpaca, the thought arose that this obstacle had been inevitable, for the mission was never destined to be simple. Kratos internally confirmed this expectation, attributing the blockade to heightened vigilance following recent demonic incursions. Yet a sly smirk crossed Kratos' face, for as a seasoned player who knew the entirety of the game's narrative, he already possessed a strategy. His eyes burned red with calculating intent. Kratos, consumed by greed, let out a chilling laugh as he proclaimed that even as an exile, he had brought genuine treasures from demon territory. The guard's stern demeanor faltered, his brow arching in surprise at the mention of such a claim. Kratos reveled inwardly, certain that the human king's hunger for intelligence about the demon lands would compel the guards to allow passage. The guard's attention shifted toward what trailed behind, questioning if the so-called treasure lay there. Kratos, grinning broadly, confirmed with enthusiasm. He presented the alpaca and the pelican, proudly declaring them exotic beasts brought from the heart of demon territory, even boasting of their supposedly delicious meat. With grand gestures, he indicated his disguised commanders, who strained to pull a small cart. The guard examined them with suspicion, muttering about the absurdity of claiming such creatures were captured alive from demon lands. With a dismissive glance, the guard identified them plainly as nothing more than an ordinary pelican and alpaca, questioning the sense in offering such things to a king. Kratos was left dumbfounded, internally railing against the flawed logic of a medieval setting where pelicans and alpacas apparently roamed in abundance. The guard, unimpressed, declared them foul-smelling and worthless, demanding their immediate departure. Rage boiled within the alpaca, her pride deeply scarred by the insult. She erupted in fury, her voice directed squarely at Kratos, before storming toward the guard in wrath. The guard froze, astonished by the creature's articulate speech, realizing instantly that it was no mere animal. Kratos recognized the opening and seized upon it. Bursting into manic laughter, he seized the furious alpaca and proclaimed that beings from the demon land spoke with clarity. To enhance the illusion, he grasped the pelican and prodded it to mimic animal-like sounds. A sharp blow struck the bird, and with a resounding cry it shrieked its strange call. Convinced at last, the guard raised his voice and granted them passage through the gates. As the mismatched band stepped forward, one among them declared the ruse a success. Yet the guard halted them once more, cautioning that although they carried rare beasts, they remained exiles and could not wander the royal domain freely. A compromise was offered: they could join the company of a royal envoy encamped nearby. Kratos inwardly seethed at the inconvenience but forced himself to adapt. Feigning humility, he assumed the role of a lowly traveler, claiming embarrassment at having brought no true treasures from the demon's realm. He introduced himself under the name Kim Jang-chil, presenting Baal under the alias Bob Badstinch, before the envoy Javier Azrahan and his attendant, Diol Frontera. Both Javier and his servant regarded the pair with suspicion, remarking that such names were strange for supposed exiles. A soldier in the envoy's retinue stepped forward, exposing the lie by insisting he had never seen them in the village. Panic struck Kratos as the envoy's guards unsheathed their weapons, demanding the truth while he realized they had been exposed. Meanwhile, Diol whispered under his breath about his young master's chronic face blindness, recognizing it as the cause of the confusion. Attempting to redirect, he discreetly pointed toward Kratos, but Javier only grew more puzzled. Desperate, Diol urged his master not to accept the strangers, warning they might indeed be demons. Javier, however, dismissed the concern with firm denial. Clasping his hands nervously, the envoy covered the situation by claiming he had no memory of them simply because no conversation had occurred before. Kratos, smirking slyly, perceived at once how easily the potato-faced envoy could be bent and exploited. Diol plotted quietly, considering the sickly Kratos frail and imagining he could discard them once their usefulness ended. Javier then cheerfully announced their departure, mentioning that the remainder of their escort awaited outside. Among them stood a blonde-haired warrior introduced as Aged Kimchi, tasked with accompanying the group. At that moment, Kratos felt icy sweat bead along his skin, his expression collapsing into sheer horror at the disastrous revelation. The hero Aged Kimchi regarded them sharply, his calculating eyes cutting through the air. Kratos faltered, forcing a trembling greeting while convinced inwardly that death was imminent. To his astonishment, Aged merely remarked on his ill appearance and advised him to look after his health. Stunned into silence by such unexpected courtesy, Kratos could only gape in utter bewilderment. As Javier proclaimed the beginning of their journey toward the capital, the newly assembled company set out together. He silently marveled at the fact that Aged Kimchi had failed to recognize him, proof that the elixir of metamorphosis had fulfilled its purpose. Yet the hero's sharp eyes still lingered on them, carrying the weight of suspicion. That evening the combined parties, the demons in disguise and the envoy's retinue, gathered around a crackling fire. Kratos inwardly trembled, realizing the peril surrounding them. A single strike would shatter their altered forms, leaving them doomed before the hero's strength. His mind raced, deciding he had no need to continue all the way to the capital. Simply selling the Chuno and abandoning these humans would suffice. Aged Kimchi's gaze flickered with unease, as if he sensed something unnatural. Kratos felt dread tighten his chest, cold sweat beading across his skin. Forcing a strained grin, he attempted to appear harmless, though the crushing weight of the hero's stare drained his body of strength. Making his decision, Kratos resolved to flee into the night with his subordinates. Beyond the tents, Sergi in her alpaca form and Azurat in the shape of a pelican slept soundly. Kratos shook Baal awake, who muttered complaints about losing precious beauty rest, which only earned the demon lord's scorn. Together with their companions, they quietly prepared to vanish into the darkness. Moving cautiously through the encampment, Kratos concentrated on their escape. Suddenly, Sergi broke the silence, speaking clearly and startling him, admitting it had taken effort to master speech in her new body. Grimly, Kratos dismissed the humans as irrelevant now that the fortress lay behind them, though unease gnawed at him, knowing their mission must be completed before exposure doomed them all. Their stealth was cut short when Aged Kimchi appeared suddenly, outlined against the silver glow of the full moon. An eye patch now concealed one eye, his expression unreadable as he stood barring their path. Kratos let out a horrified cry, realizing the entire plan had collapsed. Meanwhile in the wastelands Hartok encountered an army that had been left without a leader. Before he could even grasp the reason for their presence it became clear that they sought shelter. The situation grew worse when another army appeared with the same intention. And it did not end there. Hartok and Zephyros soon found themselves with no way out. In Kratos' absence the responsibility to act fell on them. That weight drove Hartok into panic. Back with Kratos and his group facing Aged, they are confronted about their true identity. Kratos panics trying to explain, but Bahal reassures him saying he can neutralize Aged if Kratos allows it. Kratos grows even more anxious at such recklessness, pleading with Bahal to notice that it is Kimchi standing before them. At a closer look Kimchi does not seem so powerful, yet at first he appeared frightening even to Bahal. Kimchi interrupts, warning that he can hear the two of them. Kratos freezes in fear. Kimchi reflects on the reasons behind Kratos taking such a path and why the summon of duty remains at peace with it. He seeks the hidden truth within Kratos' actions. Kratos then devises a plan, saying he came to offer a tribute to the king. This surprises Kimchi. Kratos explains that their land lacks food and they must find a way to cultivate. For that reason they carry spices in the cart. He reveals these spices are called chunos and he intends to sell them to buy vegetable seeds, trusting that Aged will understand. He justifies his secrecy by saying the capital is too far away, so they aimed for the nearest city to trade. Kratos then plays the victim begging Kimchi to let them leave without trouble. For a moment the two stare at each other. Kimchi thinks to himself that Kratos is hiding something. Yet he knows the demon lord did not lie. He also knows demons devour humans due to the lack of food. Decided Aged finally speaks. Kratos hears that he was understood yet cannot simply walk away. The reason is that Azrahan promised Kratos would deliver the tribute and such cannot be undone. The agreement is simple. Kratos must first stop and act as a merchant. Then he must fulfill the promise and head to the royal capital. Kimchi also reminds him that the agreement includes the two creatures as tribute. Kratos laughs in relief, shocking the two victims as he fully agrees with Kimchi's stance. He even remarks that creatures like them are nothing but trash from where they come. Though he seems serious inwardly, he plans to shake off the hero at the first chance. The next morning Kratos is asked what chunos look like. He invites his new companions to see for themselves, explaining that they are giant cooked potatoes. He lifts part of the cloth covering them and proudly reveals them. The pair reacts differently, one with surprise, the other with indifference. The contrast grows clearer when the ugly one becomes irritated for showing disinterest, though he was obviously intrigued by the goods. Dial steps forward, telling Kratos to offer the chuno as tribute since they seem far more valuable. Kratos answers in confusion, not understanding the interest in oversized ugly potatoes. Dial retorts that they are not merely big, they are enormous. Kratos counters that if size alone mattered, the tallest man would be king. Azrahan jokes that Dial only likes the potatoes because they resemble his face. Dial fumes, swearing that one day he will grow rich and enslave Azrahan. The group then continues their journey. Inside his mind, Kratos considers Dial's words, thinking he might gain something in return if he used the potatoes as tribute. Yet that is not the focus now. What matters is shaking off Kimchi's eyes. It does not take long until the group reaches their first destination. The city of Daparakia stands ahead. Everyone settles down except Sergei and Azurat. Time passes and they prepare for the sales. As they walk toward the marketplace, Azurat asks if Kratos truly plans to offer them as tribute. Kratos quickly denies it, calling it foolish to think he would give away his lightning rod. Azurat grows confused, believing their mission was already complete. Kratos replies that he is only on a sabbatical. Sergei cuts the talk, sensing something strange. The place should be filled with merchants. Instead, the reality is grim. The market is emptier than the land of demons itself. Kratos notices the situation. He thinks he arrived on a bad day in the middle of a shattered economy. He fears he will not be able to sell the chunos. Ignoring the worries, he decides to stick with the plan. The potatoes are laid on the ground. It is time to begin. He calls out to the crowd, announcing the sale. 1 for 22 for 30. Slowly people start to appear. Kratos shouts with energy, pouring everything into his performance. Delicious and nourishing chunos. Bahal mutters that he feels ashamed of both the scene and the demon lord's attitude. Kratos snaps, reminding him that they need food. There is nothing shameful in that. They are here because days ago they were cannibalizing one another. If this much shame is the price to prevent those days from returning, then so be it. Bahal has no argument left. He yields. Now both shout together to sell the chunos. Kratos then turns to Sergei and Azurat, who were still standing idle. Soon all four of them are involved in the effort. Kim as a player reflects on Ice Sky stories where adventurers often sell modern goods such as ice cream or fine dishes. Yet all he has is potatoes. Before long the first customer appears, shocked at the price, which is quickly confirmed. Soon after, a crowd gathers in front of the goods. The demon lord himself is surprised. Sergei and Azurat notice his distraction and urge him to focus on selling. It does not take long for the stock to run out, leaving behind a bag of money. Excited Kratos tells the generals to wait while he goes to buy seeds. Before leaving they cheer together. For a bountiful harvest. Moments later Kratos meets a merchant to negotiate. But harsh reality strikes. There are no seeds for sale in the city. No one has any. The news hits him like a bucket of cold water. Kratos asks why there are no seeds in the city. The merchant replies that nearly everything was sold to a large company. Kratos asks the name. The man notices the pallor of Kratos. Kratos tells him to ignore it and say where the company is. The merchant then notices someone arriving with a troubled expression. He tells Kratos to ask that figure instead. The man, seemingly a noble, asks if Kratos was the one selling the giant potatoes. Kratos confirms. The man introduces himself as Ruslin, secretary to someone important named Richmond. He is in charge of handling the company's trade operations. Kratos understands and asks why there is such interest in him. Ruslin goes straight to the point. He wants to buy all the potatoes for 20% above the price Kratos was charging. Kratos sees through what is happening. Before moving forward, he asks the price of a handful of cabbage seeds. The man answers they cost 100 coins. Kratos confirms his suspicions. By analyzing the situation and comparing average prices, reaching a maximum of 50, he realizes the company are hoarders. They control distribution channels with these strategies, seeking absurd profits. This explains why the city is deserted and why people were desperate to buy the Chuno. After putting the pieces together, the demon lord's cunning comes to light. Ruslan is struck by Kratos' expression. The plan is simple. Even if he sold everything, Kratos would not get enough seeds. So he concludes he does not need to buy from these people. Looking to the side, he notices Kimchi watching him closely and full of suspicion. Yet Kratos already has a way to shake him off and still obtain seeds. Turning back to Ruslan, who suggests a contract, Kratos goes straight to the point. Bring your master here. Ruslan is caught once again. Angrily, he stresses that he is responsible for the business. Kratos mocks him and ignores it. He claims Ruslan is nothing but an employee unfit to negotiate with him. Ruslan insists he is the commander of company deals. Kratos mocks again. To prove him unworthy, Kratos gives his counteroffer. 200 coins for each potato. Take it or leave it. For the third time, Ruslan is stunned by the demon lord's sharpness. Saying the price is too high only makes Kratos laugh. He points out the hesitation. Kratos argues that the potatoes are easy to store and useful for the royal army. Ruslan's master would accept the deal without hesitation. By questioning their distribution strategy, Kratos corners him completely. He finishes with the same demand. Bring your master. By nightfall, Sergei and Azurat wait in the rain. Azurat grows irritated by the conditions they are left in. Sergei tells him to keep quiet so they do not draw attention. Azurat turns his anger toward her. She stands firm in loyalty. He asks if she is not upset with their situation. Sergei replies that she is actually enjoying it a little. This shocks Azurat. She explains she had always been curious about life behind the city walls. Since childhood she heard there was food in abundance, and that people did not eat one another. For her, such a reality had always seemed impossible. She had lost her parents because of those food shortages. Yet she did not feel sad, believing it was the natural order of things. To die feeding a stronger demon. She then asks Azurat if he never thought the same, mentioning his brothers. Sergei points out that the city is poor, yet people do not devour each other. She recalls a starving father feeding his child first. She imagines that if she had been born here, perhaps she would have been happy with her family. Azurat stays silent and notices Sergei's sadness. He then asks if her sentimentality made her lose her alpaca accent. She answers that she simply grew used to the pronunciation. Azurat extends one of his wings, shielding Sergei from the rain. He says that maybe now demons might have a chance to live in a happier era. Suddenly Kratos appears, drawing both of their attention. Azurat quickly clears a possible misunderstanding, saying Sergei was being rude. Sergei defends herself and tells Kratos to kill Azurat for bullying. Ignoring them, Kratos grabs both under his arms and carries them inside to a strategic meeting. Inside the room with the meeting underway, Azurat questions the monopoly of the company. Sergei does not understand the reason for such actions. Azurat also asks why they would do this in a land that seems abundant. Kratos replies that scarcity is not the issue. Their only goal is wealth. Bahal steps in, reasoning that once basic needs are secured, hierarchies emerge and individuals seek notoriety. Kratos mocks him, asking what kind of pseudo-intellectual nonsense that is. Azurat argues back, saying it is not notoriety but greed. He insists it is unjust, having lived through famine himself. Sergei adds that this greed is a problem, reminding them there are still people starving, recalling her past as well. Bahal begins to feel uneasy at the injustice. Kratos then declares that even if they are disturbed by it, this is how humans are. All they can do is calm down and play by the rules. But not by human rules. Demons are demons. Their goal is to raid the human stockpiles. Meanwhile, in the wastelands, a whirlwind of wind stood out among the mountains. The demons watched with strangeness at all that effort. Hartok was endlessly creating several whirlwinds, and the reason was not entirely clear. The workers talked, explaining that Hartok had requested gigantic stone pots and then began to create whirlwinds without stopping. Everyone watched while Hartok carried on with his secret plan. Finishing one whirlwind, Hartok collapsed from fatigue into a puddle of water. He realized the satisfactory result of what he had been doing. Lifting his head, he noticed that the people were idle. He shouted for everyone to get back to work, irritated that they were watching him as if it were a private show. Zephyros approached, saying Hartok was pushing himself beyond his limits. Looking at the broader picture, countless pots were holding the water generated by the whirlwinds, but the purpose was still unclear. Hartok then stated that there were many demons under his care, and there was a risk of them starving due to the low amount of chunos available. So, the plan was to feed everyone by cooking the chunos. Determined and wearing an expression similar to those of Kratos, Hartok would not allow any of the demons to go hungry. Zephyros and Tbone observed Hartok's determination. Zephyros wondered why there was a need to make a killer face after explaining such a charitable goal. Zephyros reflected on how everything had changed since Kratos had given the order to start cultivating. Now he saw a former cruel companion giving his life to provide food for others. He also wondered what could have driven Hartok to act with such intentions. But Hartok had only one thing in mind: the amount of praise and gratitude he would receive for his idea. Zephyros then decided to ask how Hartok intended to generate enough fire for so many pots without wood. Hartok admitted that even if he used the wood from everyone's houses, it would not be enough. And that was why the next part of the plan was to capture the predator of fire, heading to the sealed volcano for it. The information left Zephyros stunned. The scene shifted to the merchant city. A group of merchants walked, with Richmond himself leading them. They arrived at the place where Kratos was staying, with Ruslan confirming that Kratos was indeed there. Richmond told Ruslan that he was disappointed in him. Richmond declared that he had not expected Ruslan to be intimidated by some ignorant fool, putting his fate in question. He then went on alone, telling Ruslan to wait, and the subordinate obeyed, completely embarrassed. Richmond proceeded to the meeting, confident that it would not be a negotiation but rather a lesson in how to negotiate with ignorance. Kratos was waiting and heard someone knocking at the door. Richmond announced that it was him, saying he was there because his presence had been requested. Kratos allowed the merchant to enter, and Richmond asked for permission before opening the door. The fact that Kratos had let Richmond in so easily made the merchant think they were careless when faced with people who used refined language. But the scene Richmond saw the moment he stepped inside completely shattered any perspective he had been building on the way to the inn. Richmond was terrified by the posture of the demons. Kratos was fully aware of the setup there and told Richmond to sit down. Richmond obeyed and evaluated the group's posture, saying they looked like demons. He turned his attention to the pelican and the alpaca, who looked like beasts but had human expressions. Each one was frightening in their own way, including Bahal, who was drooling. Kratos asked if Richmond had been informed about the offer made. Richmond replied yes, the cost would be 200 per potato. Kratos denied it and stated the price was 300. Richmond froze for a moment, horrified. He tried to argue, saying 300 was too much. But Kratos ignored him and revealed he was part of the Azrahan group. Richmond was stunned to hear that. Kratos reinforced the information, belonging to the group that took direct orders from the royal family. He argued that it would be a good idea to negotiate and stand on the side of the royal family. The scene then shifted to Richmond already outside, meeting Ruslan and informing him that the deal had been closed at 300. Not only that, he had also arranged for Kratos' group to be escorted to the mansion, with individual accommodations, even for the alpaca and the pelican. Ruslan asked why he had shown such generosity to ignorance. Richmond grew irritated, saying that small losses in the short term always bring great profit in the long term. The truth was Richmond had closed the deal because he was afraid of Kratos' group. Inside the room, Bahal asked if it would not be easier to eliminate everyone and take the supplies. Kratos replied that if that happened, there was a chance their disguises would be undone, which could end in a war between humans and demons. The better option was to avoid fights and drain everything possible from them before disappearing. Kratos explained that Richmond needed 3 things to maintain a monopoly. The first was strong backing, someone to cover and support him. The second was a large warehouse, which Kratos still needed to investigate. Sergei interrupted, asking how he knew so much about negotiating with humans, almost as if he had lived in that world for a long time. Kratos paused for a moment. The answer he gave was simple: he knew because it was obvious, he was the Demon King. The 3 received the information and quickly accepted it, impressed. Outside the room, Kimchi overheard everything. He understood the plan to take everything from the humans. That was Kratos' initial plan all along. The scene then shifted to Richmond's palace. Azrahan and Diol were pleased with the accommodations Kratos had secured in the palace, but Azrahan questioned how it had been possible. Kratos explained that Richmond was very grateful for the sale of the potatoes and had granted not only the lodging but also gifts. Azrahan did not believe the potatoes could have such value because of their size, while Diol reminded him that the potatoes were not just big, they were enormous and should have been given to the king. Azrahan joked upon realizing that Diol really considered the potatoes valuable, going beyond the fact that they looked like Diol's face. Diol then asked Kratos if he had sold all the potatoes to Richmond, and Kratos replied yes. The information drove Diol mad. Until Kratos revealed that he would get the potatoes back because he intended to steal them. Diol, without questioning anything, simply replied that he would help Kratos in the theft. Azrahan, on the other hand, reacted as a normal human being would. He asked what Kratos meant by stealing. Kratos answered that he would steal not only the potatoes but also everything Richmond had stocked. Azrahan protested, saying he was an honest man and such crimes were unacceptable. Kratos agreed, but explained that Azrahan could also accept the fact that Richmond was taking all the city's food supplies and destroying the local economy. Azrahan was left in shock by this revelation. The scene shifted to Ruslan driving the carriage loaded with potatoes toward the warehouse. He was then interrupted by Kratos, who approached praising how hard Ruslan had been working. Kratos knew Ruslan was heading to store the cargo, but asked casually. Ruslan replied yes and reflected that he could no longer stand the sight of Kratos' face. Kratos asked Ruslan to let him take a look at the warehouse, claiming he wanted to make sure they would store things properly. Ruslan refused, saying it was a secret location, but Kratos began insisting, wanting to go. Ruslan revealed that the method of storage was a trade secret, and Kratos retorted that a trade secret is my ass. The Demon King then threw himself on the ground like a spoiled child and repeated endlessly for Ruslan to let him go. Tired of the scene, Ruslan ordered the man to keep driving the carriage. Kratos noticed the command and ran to the front of the carriage, blocking the man's path. Everyone gathered to try to drag him out of the way, but Kratos resisted with all his strength. From a room window, the generals watched with disgust at what they saw. Sergei revealed he never wanted to call Kratos the Demon King again. Azrahan also watched as Kratos was lifted up, singing an improvised song whose lyrics begged to be taken to the warehouse. Azrahan was ashamed of being associated with that creature. Diol, however, said that Kratos was a true man, leaving his companion confused. Diol reasoned that throwing away all dignity for the sake of the city's residents was something of value and should be taken as a lesson. Azrahan reflects on how confident Kratos once was, yet now he is being driven away. He recalls the conversation where Kratos explained that he wanted to punish the merchants by giving Azrahan evidence of their crimes, so he could take it to court. But that would take far too much time. And during all that time people would go hungry. That is something he cannot endure. For this reason, Kratos needs Azrahan to understand and help him return to the people what belongs to them. Remembering this, Azrahan decides to keep believing in Kratos' plans. He places his hope in him, trusting he will find the warehouse and provide support at the right moment. Even if it is embarrassing that the method used to locate the place is something so ridiculous. In the final moments of the commotion, the men begin counting to 3 before throwing Kratos away. The Demon King even tries to return to his position, but the men have already moved. Even though they are now relatively far, it doesn't matter. The plan has already been carried out successfully. Kratos has made Ruslan furious and because of that, the blood eye could be used. Now Ruslan can be tracked for 7 hours. With this, the location of the warehouse is revealed, hidden within the Dutskirt's mines. Kimchi also watches everything through a window. He recognizes that Kratos could have solved everything by force, and this makes him question whether all of this was truly for justice. The doubt now lingers, is Kratos a demon or a hero? Meanwhile, the Demon King walks calmly, preparing for the next stages. In another place, Hartok enters the lair of the fire demon. Zephyros is with him and knows the flame devourer is powerful, which is why they should be joined by an entire army. Hartok disagrees, saying that precisely because the creature is so powerful, he cannot risk so many lives. That would go against the duty of generals, which is to protect everyone. Hartok's words echo with emotion, leaving Zephyros and Tbone shaken. He notices that Zephyros did not write down his words, so Zephyros quickly records them. Hartok then walks proudly, convinced that Kratos will be pleased with the intellect and good character of his general. Hartok then delivers an expository speech, recounting the story of the flame devourer. The creature was sealed in this place because of its overwhelming power. And it was that very power that spared it from execution, despite consuming its own people. Now standing before the seal, Hartok observes. He calls the creature by name, Ikrit, telling it he has a mission for it. The lava begins to shift, and a massive flaming tower rises. From it emerges Ikrit, a dragon. The dragon's size is colossal, far beyond what Hartok expected. The general, once confident in his plan, is now completely frozen, unsure of what step to take next.
Meanwhile, the secretary waits outside while petting the baby dragon's belly. Suddenly, Hartok appears, telling him to run, shouting since Ifrit was rampaging after him. The monster prepares its attack and fires its flames at the two. While running, the secretary asks what happened since he had entered the volcano full of confidence. He tells him to shut up since the monster ate fire for too long and became too strong. Zapharos resumes his notes, saying that Hartok said he would face danger head-on and ended up fleeing with his tail between his legs. And this makes the general curious, calling the secretary crazy since it is not to describe the situation in such detail, and makes it clear that at the moment they will retreat since they need to think of another way to light the fire. As soon as he says this, he remembers the precarious situation of his lands and therefore breaks immediately since he has no time to lose. He activates his ability and goes against Ifrit while shouting that he is Hardtalk, one of the 4 celestial generals, and therefore will fulfill the mission even if it costs his life. At the same time, the baby dragon releases its power that hits the dragon's face and begins to form an ice crust until completely trapping the monster. Hardtalk is left speechless and returns to the ground. Because of this, the secretary begins to write down that the mighty Hartok, one of the 4 celestial generals, was extremely embarrassed, and he is ordering not to write such absurdities since it seems crazy to do that. After all this, at night in Richmond's mansion, the MC reports to everyone that he will investigate the warehouse, and therefore the 3 should wait for his signal and assures them that he is doing this for the citizens' food. Before leaving, the emissary asks why he is keeping everything secret from Kimchi. He replies that this person draws too much attention for several reasons and that their group already has enough people for the mission. Ashrahan looks at the handsome redhead and then at the 2 animals and just smiles, saying that he understood, but inside he thinks it is better not to say anything so as not to start an argument. Kratos goes outside and runs through the houses since his plan to get the seeds while distracting Kimchi needs to work, and he is happy to see that the hero is not managing and therefore decides to do the scouting right away. He notices that there are 2 guards at the entrance, and after getting quite close, he walks along the roof until hiding behind 2 crates. He reflects that the security is very heavy, and he must make sure not to start a fight since the biggest risk he is running is the metamorphosis elixir wearing off, because if the hero discovers his identity, it is game over. However, Kimchi is already behind him, and after the MC turns around and comes face to face with the hero, he almost has a heart attack. The hero comments that he knows the plan is to distribute food to the citizens, and therefore he also wants to help. Youngcho asks how he knows this, and he replies that he has good hearing since even on different floors, he can hear all the conversations the MC had. Hearing this leaves him completely shocked, and he imagines that if that is the case, the hero also heard his conversations with the generals, and he does not remember if by chance one of them called him Demon Lord or something like that. Kimchi asks what the problem is since they need to hurry, and the MC says it is fine, inside. He knows that if the Avatar had really heard everything, his body would be in pieces now, so he believes he did not hear. They begin to crawl since they need to memorize the path. But Kimchi says he is confused since he does not understand why they need to hide like this, asking if it is not easier to just kill everyone since that is how we learn. The MC sweats cold upon hearing this, remembering when he was a frenetic player and used his account to kill everyone in his path without mercy or pity. Then he replies that life is precious and therefore the best way is to finish the job as peacefully as possible without any fight. Kimchi just stares at him and says he understood. Then they continue walking, and the MC finds it strange why there are no guards in the deeper parts of the underground until something catches his attention, since in front of them there are golems patrolling the area. He knows what kind of golems they are since he saw in the game records that they were a human weapon developed by some magic tower. However, in the game, they were destroyed and didn't even appear, and for that reason, he doesn't know their power level. He barely thinks about it and comes face to face with Kimchi, obliterating the golems until none are left. Damn. He gets outraged at this and asks why the hell he went breaking everything since he made it clear that he wanted to do the mission peacefully. He replies that it's not a problem since they aren't living beings. And after thinking about the word in his head, he says that in this way the cleanup will be faster, emphasizing the word cleanup. The MC is surprised to hear this since it is exactly what he always thought during his gaming session, and that makes him excited because he really wanted to do something like this. The golems keep searching, and the MC comments that there are 3 of them, and they need to be careful not to trigger the alarm. Kimchi says he will need to analyze the routine of those bastards 10 times, and when he finds an opening, he will eliminate the farthest one between the 2, asking if that's the right thing to do. Kos replies that yes and becomes thoughtful, wondering if perhaps his old avatar has some kind of muscle memory from when he used to play with it, and comments that apparently they will need to attack simultaneously since he didn't see any openings. Because of that, the hero points to the 2 nearest golems, suggesting defeating them separately. However, the MC worried says he can't guarantee anything since he doesn't know if he could defeat those monsters. He says that thinking he has no idea what the golem's combat strength is, nor his own. Kimchi then puts his hand inside his clothes and hands him his weapon, asking him to use it since just holding it already makes a person stronger. The MC starts sweating coldly because he knows that this is one of the most powerful secret weapons in the game. Brigia's Pretty Heart Hammer, an unknown weapon with a dangerous aura that takes on a cute form to deceive others. The MC remembers that when he found the weapon, he thought it was a comic item, but the more he used it, the more he realized that the item bordered on cheating. Then, with the hammer in hand, he already notices that even with his current stats, all of them have increased by 30%. At the same time, the hero puts his hand in his clothes again and pulls out a long sword, saying he will use it. Kratos can't believe what he's seeing. Questioning if perhaps the avatar has access to all the items he had stored in the game's inventory, and if so, he's practically a god. The golems continue patrolling and Kimchi, without thinking twice, charges forward. The MC panics, having no idea why he ran off like that since they needed to attack at the same time. Only then does he realize that the hero suddenly stopped, which surprises him because he notices that he was waiting for him. With everything settled, both move to attack and begin to finish off their respective golems. At that moment, the third golem turns its head and the MC gets worried since he needs to duck and roll before being detected. However, as he does so, he realizes that the hero is making the same movement and both use the rolling strategy. But with the hero landing the final blow that destroys the golem, he is surprised to see that Kimchi is not only fast, but also moving in complete sync with him. At that moment, some guards appear since they no longer see the golems, and the MC along with Kimchi once again move in sync, take out the guards, and perfectly throw them into the dumpster. The MC still doesn't understand what's happening since, for some reason, he and Kimchi are moving as if they were one body, and he doesn't understand why. Even being alongside such a powerful monster, he feels happier than ever. The hero also watches and gives a slight smile, imagining that the MC taught him to kill and at the same time told him not to do it, even while trying to destroy humanity. Surprisingly, at that moment, he just wants peace, but feels that just being by his side already makes him happy, and wonders if perhaps asking what his true identity is would make him reveal it. However, amid these thoughts, he strangles one of the guards too hard, and Kratos shouts for him to be careful since if he squeezes too much, the guy will end up dying. He reinforces that there aren't that many bad people in the world who deserve to die, and that most likely those guards are only in that mind to earn their daily bread. He knows they're probably already wounded in heart, and for that reason, he doesn't want to hurt them more. Kimchi just watches this and they start walking again. He comments that they've advanced quite a bit, but aren't seeing any other guards or golems. At that moment, he asks for silence and says that a huge golem is guarding an even bigger door. The MC laughs since it clearly looks like the entrance to a warehouse. But before he could say anything else, the hero asks to wait a moment because something caught their attention. It was Richmond walking calmly through the mine and heading toward the golem, who asks him to identify himself since the entrance is restricted, warning that if he doesn't leave in 3 seconds, he will attack. He then shows his ring, and the golem begins to scan until it confirms that the ring contains Richmond's blood and therefore politely asks him to proceed, opening the giant door so they can enter. Kratos starts imagining things as he doesn't believe it was just by looking at the guy's blood that it could identify him. So, with a smile, he finds it sensational since their plan just got even easier. With the door still open, they observe the massive amount of food inside, and the MC admits he's surprised since he never imagined there would be so much food like bread and vegetables and even seeds stored there with impeccable preservation. Because of that, he says they will change the plan a little and points out that luckily, it will be easy to eliminate the golems. The hero hears this and instantly starts eliminating them. The MC takes the opportunity to move forward and grabs the merchant, who when trying to turn around, takes a huge punch to the mouth that almost knocks his teeth out. Kimchi turns to see what happened and notices Kratos punching so hard that it made the guy's nose bleed. This makes him remember when the MC commented that people's hearts are already hurt enough, and that's why he doesn't want to hurt anyone else, and he wonders if maybe that was a lie, and if he's a lunatic. After that, still inside the mine, Richmond finally wakes up and asks where the hell he is. The MC approaches and warns that he's in the torture room that the merchant himself built and therefore questions why a storage facility would need a torture room. Richmond gets intimidated and replies that actually it's a gym, but Kratos doesn't fall for that nonsense and holding his head starts staring at him to use his ability, but it hurts his eyes so much that they start tearing up, making him look like a dog with pink eye. The important thing is that his ability activates, and it's revealed that Richmond planned to capture the MC to find out where the giant potatoes came from so he could steal them. He thanks him for reading that since it helped completely clear his conscience. Meanwhile, the merchant doesn't understand why the guy in front of him started laughing and thanking while crying and being as unpredictable as the devil. The MC asks him to wait a bit since he's about to put on quite a show. Richmond, with his head lowered, orders no one to underestimate his security system, and immediately, an even bigger golem appears and the merchant shouts for the class of golem to kill them all. He prepares to attack, but Kratos simply raises a sheet with Richmond's blood on it, and that stops the attack since the verification confirming it's Richmond is accepted. Even so, the hero cuts the golem in half since he never holds back. The merchant is terrified by what he's seeing since he messed with the wrong people, as one looks like a psychotic demon, and the other is a swordsman who destroys a golem with a single strike. At this moment, the two return to the village and Kimchi asks if the warehouse's security won't be reinforced. The MC replies that there's no need to worry since it won't help against the strength of numbers. Immediately, the demonic generals start shouting that the clearance sale at Richmond Company's warehouse is underway, and together with the emissaries announce to everyone in the city that they can go to the warehouse and take whatever they want. People are surprised, but unsure if they can really go there and take anything. However, Kratos appears and shouts for everyone to take as much as they can carry. Hearing that leaves the population in ecstasy about what they're about to do. At the same time, the warehouse guards notice something and ask what the hell is going on since they don't understand why the citizens are approaching en masse. They warn that it's private property and order the golem to stop everyone. The population becomes frustrated since they knew that Richmond is the kind of guy who would take everything to the grave and wouldn't give up just because he went bankrupt. But Kos tells them not to worry, and showing once again the handkerchief with the merchant's blood makes the golem give permission since the blood was successfully verified. Because of that, the population runs like crazy and rushes into the mine toward the warehouse. The MC takes the opportunity to politely ask Kimchi to go ahead and silence anyone who gets in the way. Immediately, he obeys with his absurd speed. On the other hand, the MC imagines that the hero is indeed naive since he obeys everything so properly and orders his generals that as soon as they reach the warehouse, they must grab all the seeds first and after that act according to the plan without mistakes. The warehouse is full of people and the MC is in full swing stealing the seeds. At this moment, Russell goes to the torture room and immediately starts releasing Richmond, also warning that the citizens are clearing out the entire warehouse. Faced with this situation, he says they will need to activate the master of the golems, which even makes the merchant startled to the point of calling him an imbecile since he wants to make money, not commit a massacre. However, Ruslan lowers his head and furious asks what's the difference from what they've done so far since it makes no sense to follow a nobody who just turned into a beggar. Richmond becomes furious at this insult. Meanwhile, people start running away happily with the food they grabbed until a golem appears, warning that theft is not tolerated. But it's useless since Kimchi appears and with a single move cuts it in half as if it were butter. The MC, however, keeps going at full speed since he knows the hero is busy protecting the citizens and that the emissaries have also run off to help. So, he got rid of everyone who could interfere. He concludes that if they can escape through this opening, everything will be resolved. With that in mind, he shouts that they are leaving. But at this moment, the ceiling begins to shake and he gets confused about what's happening until a huge part of the ceiling breaks and falls toward the people grabbing food. Without thinking twice, he shouts for his generals to hold the massive stone, and before it can hit the woman and her daughter, all four of them appear, holding the ceiling with all their strength. Only then does the MC look to the side and Ruslan appears, calling them vulgar thieves, and with his high-level golems, warns that he will kill everyone until he gets the food back. Meanwhile, in the demonic realm, the lesser demons throw the chunos into the pots, and with Ifrit tied to the ground, one of them gets ready and hits him on the head, making the dragon spit fire toward all the pots with potatoes, which immediately begin to boil. This result excites everyone since it worked. Zapiros tells Hartok that everything is going well, but notices that he's sulking because he couldn't capture the fire predator in a cool way. Because of that, he writes in his notes that the one who captured the dragon was Tabon, while Lord Hartok was disappointed with his own pathetic figure. That makes him furious, telling him not to describe his emotions until his reaction changes when he sees the secretary writing that everything was only possible thanks to General Hartok's brilliant plan. He didn't expect such praise. Moreover, the lesser demons celebrate since the leader's idea was brilliant and the amount of food multiplied several times. So everyone keeps praising the general for it. He holds himself back for a moment, dying of embarrassment, and says that anyone could have figured it out if they had thought a little. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, the MC keeps holding the piece of stone with all his strength, but realizes it's heavier than he imagined, and knows that even with his generals, they won't hold on for long. At this moment, the system warns that if he remains firm, sustaining it with unshakable strength, he will unlock a new Demon King ability. He is surprised to see this, and the ability in question is the Thorn of Tribulation, which costs 500 happiness points. He thinks it's great since it's exactly what he needs because it's an ability that makes blood spears sprout from the ground when he stomps his foot and can thus hold up the ceiling. However, he gets frustrated since his points are not enough. Because of that, he yells for people to get out quickly or they will be crushed immediately and everyone starts running. However, a golem appears attacking the ground and Relin makes it clear that if they step outside, they will die by the golems, and if they don't, they will die crushed by the ceiling. The MC calls the guy a bastard and the ceiling keeps getting heavier, forcing him to exert even more strength. Russell warns that he is not the same useless man as Richmond and guarantees that he will crush everyone without mercy if he feels like it. He then lifts his leg and steps on a citizen's hand. Kratos becomes furious upon seeing this and exerts more and more strength to try to lift the ceiling as it's about to crush the people. At that moment, he looks to the side and sees a message saying that the demonic army is feeling happy eating delicious food. And because of that, his points start rising like never before. He has no idea what the demons are eating, but he doesn't complain since his points are increasing absurdly at just the right time. Indeed, everyone in the army is eating very well while the generals watch with smiles on their faces. Because of this, Kratos' current points rise to 15,761, and he immediately shouts, unlocking the new skill successfully. Moreover, upon consuming the happiness points, the effects of the metamorphosis elixir are dissipated. Returning to his original form, he keeps exerting even more strength, and the notification warns that he must level up the skill to increase the number of spears. He orders the 4 celestial generals to hold firmly, and they immediately apply even more strength. Then, spending 15,100 happiness points, he evolves the Thorn of Tribulation to the maximum level. Russell, who is terrified to see a human lift an entire ceiling, cannot believe it until he questions if what's happening is a demon. People also get scared upon seeing this, but Kratos doesn't waste time, and with his foot raised, stomps on the ground, causing dozens of spikes to shoot toward the ceiling. At that moment, Kimchi feels a strange sensation and looks toward the warehouse. While the spikes hold up the massive rock, people imagine that without a doubt, a demon stands before them. But this demon saved them. He walks away, and the merchant takes the opportunity to shout that there's a demon who eats humans and that everyone must wipe out his kind. However, the MC asks if this is some kind of joke. Then, after grabbing the hero's hammer, questions who is truly eating humans. Ruslan is startled and doesn't understand what the hell that rod with a heart is. The MC firmly holds the item, which begins to change shape, revealing a frightening eye that starts to materialize somehow. At that moment, Kimchi arrives at the scene and is shocked to see Kratos holding a demonic sword completely different from the one he had given before. This one is the sacred sword Bragia. Kratos makes it clear that he doesn't forgive people who are cruel with food, and after preparing himself since the golems are charging to attack, he raises his sword, which is overflowing with enormous power, and after striking toward the golems, they are all obliterated by the devastating power of the sword, which destroys everything beside Ruslan, who remains paralyzed with fear. At that moment, Kimchi appears and comments that apparently Kratos was about to kill a human, and that in the end, he's nothing more than a demon. The MC is startled by this, and even while holding the sword tightly, lets it go, making it fall to the ground and return to its original form. He imagines that he will die anyway, and therefore begs for the lives of the subordinates behind him to be spared. The generals can't believe why Lord Kratos is saying this. Meanwhile, Kimchi just looks down and prepares his sword, saying it's a pity since he wanted to know a little more about him. Kos keeps his eyes closed, and at that moment, Sergei yells for them to undo the transformation and therefore kicks Akira in the face, who retaliates with a slap and both attack Bahal. Then the generals with their transformations undone stand in front of the Demon King, saying that if he wants to kill him, he will have to kill them first. The MC yells for them not to do that, but the hero charges anyway. At that moment, a villager shouts for the Pink Warrior to wait a bit, and says that the people in front of him certainly look like demons, but saved everyone's lives and assures that apparently it's not only demons who hurt humans. He says this while pointing at Russell, who becomes enraged and shouts that he would rather destroy everything than let anyone keep the food. The MC is startled to see this and starts shouting for everyone to be careful since it's a self-destruction device. However, it's already too late because the merchant pressed the device and then the mine, which had been calm, collapsed with several explosions occurring in the area. The people outside are frightened, but the explosions become increasingly stronger to the point of destroying everything. Azrahan screams desperately since there are many people inside, but becomes startled upon seeing 4 people flying and wonders if they are demons. The MC along with the generals lands on the ground and shouts that they've been discovered and therefore need to run to the demons' territory. Richmond, who is being carried, asks why the hell he's being taken along, and the MC replies that apparently the rascal is good at managing food and therefore from that day on will manage the demon's warehouse. He's shocked, unable to believe such absurdity, and then the demons flee like never before. Meanwhile, people are in shock watching the fire consume the entire mine, but the hero's silhouette appears, and with a single movement, he disperses all the fire, revealing that everyone is safe. Families reunite, happy to be alive, and the emissary goes to Kimchi, wanting to know what happened and if some demons came out of the mine since apparently they were the ones who caused the explosion. However, the hero replies, no, and thinking about the group, concludes that they are not normal demons. Going back a bit in time, Rusland was holding the detonator, and upon activating the item, the entire warehouse collapsed, and without hesitation, the MC shouted for his generals to protect the people. Immediately, they used everything they had to protect each citizen within that explosion. Unlike Ruslan, who burst into laughter watching all the chaos, though not for long as a rock fell on him, the hero approaches, calls for Kratos, and tells him that he himself will save the people and that the Demon King should take the seeds and leave. Then, with a smile, he wishes that he may plant in peace everything he can. Kratos is surprised by this outcome. Returning to the present, everyone keeps running, and the MC looking back concludes that Kimchi knew everything from the beginning and was just observing. But he knows the important part is another, and shouts that they got the seeds, and that when they return, they will plant them immediately, so he yells for them to speed up. With that, they run at full speed. After that, amid all the destruction caused, the emissary asks what sense there was in installing a self-destruction device if there were so many things to hide, and also asks about the MC since he doesn't understand why he suddenly left being someone who gave food back to the citizens. So, if he went to the capital, he would even receive a reward. Kimchi says he believes the MC must have been scared, since after all, he messed with someone else's property. Astrahan comments that he didn't seem like the type to be scared, but after thinking a little, asks if perhaps the demons had any relation to the MC. However, in the middle of the sentence, the hero interrupts him, saying there were no demons, and even the villagers said they didn't see any demons. Besides, if Jang Chio really were a demon, what reason would he have had to protect the villagers? The hemisphere remains silent until the hero changes the subject and asks why Bata is digging the stones. Azrahan replies that his servant is looking for anything of value and therefore tells him not to be greedy. However, his expression changes when he sees him shouting that he found Chunos in the place and can offer them to the king. Meanwhile, at the rear of the fortress of Magra, the water begins to bubble and the MC along with his generals appears. Since the fortress has reinforced security and they will have to take another route, they continue fleeing until some guards who are observing notice that there are some people heading toward the abandoned land. The MC doesn't understand why his heart is beating so fast, but comforts himself since at least he has the Demon King's body, so he doesn't run out of breath easily. After some time, the sun begins to rise, and in the demonic kingdom, Flute is drinking soup, enjoying every sip with her father. He asks if she wants more, but she refuses since she is full. Besides, she says they need to save food because if the Demon King appears without the seeds, that porridge might be their last resort. Her father asks her to trust Kratos since he will definitely return with the seeds. However, she says that if he returns with nothing, it won't be a problem. And with a smile, she comments that at least she had a full belly once in her life and is very grateful for that. Her father cries with emotion hearing that until they hear someone shouting that the Demon Lord has returned. And she becomes even happier when she hears that he came back with the seeds. All the demons are back safe and sound and everyone runs toward them. However, there is a catch since in Richmond's vision in front of him are dozens of demonic creatures ready to devour him. However, the reality is different as Flute was happy to see Ashura again, saying she missed him. Tibon also flies at full speed toward Kratos, happy to see him well. Zephyros thanks the generals for the great work and says that all the demons are grateful, but Sergei embarrassed tells them to stop the nonsense since she didn't do anything to please anyone. Then the MC calls Hartok's attention since Tibon told him everything that happened, and with a smile he thanks the brightest mind of the demonic kingdom for solving everything in his absence. Hartok processes what he just heard and becomes emotional once again. Then the MC looks to the side and sees the demons tossing Sergei into the air in celebration as volume all the other generals are happy as well. Only then does he realize what his heart beating fast meant moments earlier as the scene he is witnessing is so heartwarming, and with a smile he shouts for everyone to prepare for the next cultivation. He goes to check which seeds he got and realizes that most were rice seeds, but he knows they require a lot of preparation and the weather isn't favorable, so for now they'll have to set them aside. After the rice seeds, the largest quantity is corn, and besides that, there are also pumpkin and bean seeds. He announces that he will cultivate these 3 seeds in the smallest area with maximum efficiency, and explains that this is called the Three Sisters cultivation method. It's a farming method that allows growing 3 types of crops that have a symbiotic relationship in the same place and at the same time. The beans planted alongside the corn will grow by climbing the corn stalk. For example, Hartok is surprised to learn this, since in this way the beans will protect the corn from external attacks, such as strong wind. Also on the ground, the pumpkins with their wide leaves will spread everywhere. Hart comments once again that this will prevent the soil from drying out and will also stop weeds from growing. And the MC can't believe this guy knows so much about agriculture and doesn't understand why he hasn't dedicated himself to it until now. Sergei, all excited, asks to start preparing right away, and Kratos asks if she's eager to see the children eating with full bellies. She gets embarrassed and says she doesn't care about the others. Ashura then asks where they should start. The MC sees him holding hands with Flute and asks since when they get along. He changes his expression and warns that she is just a low-class demon under his command, and the MC doesn't understand why these demons insist on making grumpy faces. Then he tells them not to rush since they have all the demons gathered, and with all the manpower, things will work out in the blink of an eye. The secretary then says it won't be easy to mobilize the demons from other regions. He says that, and they go outside to see the chaos of the demon races fighting among themselves. Zephyrus comments that it's total chaos since the demons are fighting each other to take the highest position in each rank. He also says there's Raster who is still alive, but it's as if he weren't since he just stands still on the lightning rod. The MC comments that this is the way of demons, but warns that times have changed, so with a smile he makes it clear that before Lord Kratos that place will have fair dual rules.